Chapter 37. In spite of Butler's rage and his determination to do many things to the financier if he could, he was so wrought up and shocked by the attitude of Eileen that he could scarcely believe he was the same man he had been 24 hours before. She was so nonchalant, so defiant. He had expected to see her wilt completely when confronted with her guilt. Instead, he found, to his despair, after they were once safely out of the house, that he had aroused a fighting quality in the girl which was not incomparable to his own. She had some of his own and Owen's grit. She sat beside him in the little runabout, not his own, in which he was driving her home, her face coloring and blanching by turns, as different waves of thought swept over her, determined to stand her ground now that her father had so plainly trapped her, to declare for Cowperwood and her love and her position in general. What did she care, she asked herself, what her father thought now? She was in this thing. She loved Cowperwood. She was permanently disgraced in her father's eyes. What difference could it all make now? He had fallen so low in his parental feelings as to spy on her and expose her before other men, strangers, detectives, Cowperwood. What real affection could she have for him after this? He had made a mistake, according to her. He had done a foolish and a contemptible thing, which was not warranted, however bad her actions might have been. What could he hope to accomplish by rushing in on her in this way, and ripping the veil from her very soul before these other men, these crude detectives? Oh, the agony of that walk from the bedroom to the reception-room! She would never forgive her father for this, never, never, never. He had now killed her love for him. That was what she felt. It was to be a battle royale between them from now on. As they rode, in complete silence for a while, her hands clasped and unclasped defiantly, her nails cutting her palms, and her mouth hardened. It is an open question whether raw opposition ever accomplishes anything of value in this world. It seems so inherent in this mortal scheme of things that it appears to have a vast validity. It is more than likely that we owe this spectacle called life to it, and that this can be demonstrated scientifically. But when that is said and done, what is the value? What is the value of the spectacle? And what the value of a scene such as this enacted between Eileen and her father? The old man saw nothing for it, as they rode on, save a grim contest between them, which could end in what? What could he do with her? They were riding away fresh from this awful catastrophe, and she was not saying a word. She had even asked him why he had come there. How was he to subdue her, when the very act of trapping her had failed to do so? His ruse, while so successful materially, had failed so utterly spiritually. They reached the house, and Eileen got out. The old man, too nonplussed to wish to go further at this time, drove back to his office. He then went out and walked, a peculiar thing for him to do. He had done nothing like that in years, walking to think. Coming to an open Catholic church, he went in and prayed for enlightenment, the growing dusk of the interior, the single everlasting lamp before the repository of the chalice, and the high white altar set with candles, soothing his troubled feelings. He came out of the church after a time and returned home. Eileen did not appear at dinner, and he could not eat. He went into his private room and shut the door, thinking. The dreadful spectacle of Eileen in a house of ill repute burned in his brain. To think that Cowperwood should have taken her to such a place, his Eileen, his and his wife's pet. In spite of his prayers, his uncertainty, her opposition, the puzzling nature of the situation, she must be got out of this. She must go away for a while, give the man up, and then the law should run its course with him. In all likelihood, Cowperwood would go to the penitentiary. If ever a man richly deserved to go, it was he. Butler would see that no stone was left unturned. He would make it a personal issue, if necessary. All he had to do was to let it be known in judicial circles that he wanted it so. He could not suborn a jury. That would be criminal. But he could see that the case was properly and forcefully presented, and if Cowperwood were convicted, heaven help him. The appeal of his financial friends would not save him. The judges of the lower and superior courts knew on which side their bread was buttered. They would strain a point in favor of the highest political opinion of the day, and he certainly could influence that. Eileen, meanwhile, was contemplating the peculiar nature of her situation. In spite of their silence on the way home, she knew that a conversation was coming with her father. It had to be. He would want her to go somewhere. Most likely he would revive the European trip in some form. She now suspected the invitation of Mrs. Mollenhauer as a trick, and she had to decide whether she would go. Would she leave Cowperwood just when he was about to be tried? She was determined she would not. She wanted to see what was going to happen to him. She would leave home first, run to some relative, some friend, some stranger if necessary, and ask to be taken in. She had some money, a little. Her father had always been very liberal with her. She could take a few clothes and disappear. They would be glad enough to send for her after she had been gone a while. Her mother would be frantic. Nora and Callum and Owen would be beside themselves with wonder and worry. Her father? She could see him. Maybe that would bring him to his senses. In spite of all her emotional vagaries, she was the pride and interest of this home, and she knew it. It was in this direction that her mind was running when her father, a few days after the dreadful exposure in the 6th Street house, sent for her to come to him in his room. He had come home from his office very early in the afternoon, hoping to find Eileen there, in order that he might have a private interview with her, and by good luck found her in. She had had no desire to go out into the world these last few days. She was too expectant of trouble to come. She had just written Cowperwood, asking for a rendezvous out on the Wissahickon the following afternoon, in spite of the detectives. She must see him. Her father, she said, had done nothing, but she was sure he would attempt to do something. She wanted to talk to Cowperwood about that. "I've been thinking about you, Eileen, and what ought to be done in this case," began her father without preliminaries of any kind once they were in his office room in the house together. "You're on the road to ruin, if anyone ever was. I tremble when I think of your immortal soul. I want to do something for you, my child, before it's too late. I've been reproaching myself for the last month and more, thinking perhaps it was something I had done, or maybe had failed to do, either me or your mother, that has brought you to this place where you are today. Needless to say, it's on me conscience, me child. It's a heartbroken man you're looking at this day. I'll never be able to hold me head up again. Oh, the shame, that I should have lived to see it." "But, father," protested Eileen, who was a little distraught at the thought of having to listen to a long preachment which would relate to her duty to God and the church and her family, and her mother and him. She realized that all these were important in their way, but Cowperwood and his point of view had given her another outlook on life. They had discussed this matter of families, parents, children, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, from almost every point of view. Cowperwood's laissez-faire attitude had permeated and colored her mind completely. She saw things through his cold, direct, I satisfy myself attitude. He was sorry for all the little differences of personality that sprang up between people, causing quarrels, bickerings, oppositions, and separation. But they could not be helped. People outgrew each other. Their points of view altered at varying ratios, hence changes. Morals, those who had them, had them. Those who hadn't. There was no explaining. As for him, he saw nothing wrong in the sex relationship. Between those who were mutually compatible, it was innocent and delicious. Eileen in his arms, unmarried, but loved by him, and he by her, was as good and pure as any living woman, a great deal purer than most. One found oneself in a given social order, theory, or scheme of things. For purposes of social success, in order not to offend, to smooth one's path, make things easy, avoid useless criticism and the like, it was necessary to create an outward seeming, ostensibly conform. Beyond that, it was not necessary to do anything. Never fail, never get caught. If you did, fight your way out silently and say nothing. That was what he was doing in connection with his present financial troubles. That was what he had been ready to do the other day when they were caught. It was something of all this that was coloring Eileen's mood as she listened at present. "But, father," she protested, "I love Mr. Cowperwood. It's almost the same as if I were married to him. He will marry me some day when he gets a divorce from Mrs. Cowperwood. You don't understand how it is. He's very fond of me, and I love him. He needs me." Butler looked at her with strange, non-understanding eyes. "Divorce, did you say?" he began, thinking of the Catholic Church and its dogma in regard to that. "He'll divorce his own wife and children, and for you, will he? He needs you, does he?" he added sarcastically. "What about his wife and children? I don't suppose they need him, do they? What talk have ye?" Eileen flung her head back defiantly. "It's true, nevertheless," she reiterated. "You just don't understand." Butler could scarcely believe his ears. He had never heard such talk before in his life from anyone. It amazed and shocked him. He was quite aware of all the subtleties of politics and business, but these of romance were too much for him. He knew nothing about them. To think a daughter of his should be talking like this, and she a Catholic! He could not understand where she got such notions, unless it was from the Machiavellian, corrupting brain of Cowperwood himself. "How long have you had these notions, my child?" he suddenly asked, calmly and soberly. "Where did you get them? You certainly never heard anything like that in this house, I warrant. You talk as though you had gone out of your mind." "Oh, don't talk nonsense, father," flared Eileen angrily, thinking how hopeless it was to talk to her father about such things anyhow. "I'm not a child any more. I'm 24 years of age. You just don't understand. Mr. Cowperwood doesn't like his wife. He's going to get a divorce when he can and will marry me. I love him, and he loves me, and that's all there is to it." "Is it, though?" asked Butler, grimly determined, by hook or by crook, to bring this girl to her senses. "You'll be taking no thought of his wife and children, then? The fact that he's going to jail, besides, is nothing to you, I suppose. You'd love him just as much in convict stripes, I suppose. More, maybe." The old man was at his best, humanely speaking, when he was a little sarcastic. "You'll have him that way, likely, if at all." Eileen blazed at once to a furious heat. "Yes, I know," she sneered. "That's what you would like. I know what you've been doing. Frank does, too. You're trying to railroad him to prison for something he didn't do, and all on account of me. Oh, I know. But you won't hurt him. You can't. He's bigger and finer than you think he is, and you won't hurt him in the long run. He'll get out again. You want to punish him on my account, but he doesn't care. I'll marry him anyhow. I love him, and I'll wait for him and marry him, and you can do what you please, so there." "You'll marry him, will you?" asked Butler, nonplussed and further astounded. "So you'll wait for him and marry him. You'll take him away from his wife and children, where, if he were half a man, he'd be staying this minute instead of gallivanting around with you, and marry him. You disgrace your father and your mother and your family? You'll stand here and say this to me, I that have raised you, cared for you, and made something of you? Where would you be if it weren't for me and your poor hard-working mother, scheming and planning for your year in and year out? You're smarter than I am, I suppose. You know more about the world than I do, or anyone else that might want to say anything to you. I've raised you to be a fine lady, and this is what I get. Talk about me not being able to understand, and ye loving a convict-to-be, a robber, an embezzler, a bankrupt, a lying thief, and—" "Father!" exclaimed Eileen determinedly. "I'll not listen to you talking that way. He's not any of the things you say. I'll not stay here." She moved toward the door, but Butler jumped up now and stopped her. His face for the moment was flushed and swollen with anger. "But I'm not through with him yet," he went on, ignoring her desire to leave and addressing her direct, confident now that she was as capable as another of understanding him. "I'll get him as sure as I have a name. There's law in this land, and I'll have it on him. I'll show him whether he'll come sneaking into decent homes and robbing parents of their children." He paused after a time for want of breath, and Eileen stared, her face tense and white. Her father could be so ridiculous. He was, contrasted with Cowperwood and his views, so old-fashioned. To think he could be talking of someone coming into their home and stealing her away from him, when she had been so willing to go. What silliness! And yet why argue? What good could be accomplished arguing with him here in this way? And so, for the moment, she said nothing more, merely looked. But Butler was by no means done. His mood was too stormy, even though he was doing his best now to subdue himself. "It's too bad, daughter," he resumed quietly, once he was satisfied that she was going to have little, if anything, to say. "I'm letting my anger get the best of me. It wasn't that I intended talking to you about when I asked you to come in. It's something else I have on me mind. I was thinking, perhaps, you'd like to go to Europe for the time being to study music. You're not quite yourself just at present. You're needing a rest. It would be good for you to go away for a while. You could have a nice time over there. Nora could go along with you, if you would, and Sister Constantia, that taught you. You wouldn't object to having her, I suppose?" At the mention of this idea of a trip of Europe again, with Sister Constantia and music thrown in to give it a slightly new form, Eileen bridled, and yet half-smiled to herself now. It was so ridiculous, so tactless, really, for her father to bring up this now, and especially after denouncing Cowperwood and her, and threatening all the things he had. Had he no diplomacy at all where she was concerned? It was really too funny. But she restrained herself here again, because she felt as well as saw that argument of this kind was all futile now. "I wish you wouldn't talk about that, Father," she began, having softened under his explanation. "I don't want to go to Europe now. I don't want to leave Philadelphia. I know you want me to go, but I don't want to think of going now. I can't." Butler's brow darkened again. What was the use of all this opposition on her part? Did she really imagine that she was going to master him, her father, and in connection with such an issue as this? How impossible! But tempering his voice as much as possible, he went on, quite softly in fact. "But it would be so fine for you, Eileen. You surely can't expect to stay here after—" He paused, for he was going to say, "What has happened?" He knew she was very sensitive on that point. His own conduct in hunting her down had been such a breach of fatherly courtesy that he knew she felt resentful, and in a way properly so. Still, what could be greater than her own crime? "After," he concluded, "you have made such a mistake, you surely wouldn't want to stay here. You won't be wanting to keep up that, committing a mortal sin. It's against the laws of God and man." He did so hope the thought of sin would come to Eileen, the enormity of her crime from a spiritual point of view, but Eileen did not see it at all. "You don't understand me, Father," she exclaimed hopelessly toward the end. "You can't. I have one idea, and you have another. But I don't seem to be able to make you understand now. The fact is, if you want to know it, I don't believe in the Catholic Church any more, so there." The moment Eileen had said this, she wished she had not. It was a slip of the tongue. Butler's face took on an inexpressibly sad, despairing look. "You don't believe in the Church?" he asked. "No, not exactly. Not like you do." He shook his head. "The harm that has come to your soul," he replied. "It's plain to me, daughter, that something terrible has happened to you. This man has ruined you, body and soul. Something must be done. I don't want to be hard on you, but you must leave Philadelphia. You can't stay here. I can't permit you. You can go to Europe, or you can go to your aunt's in New Orleans, but you must go somewhere. I can't have you staying here. It's too dangerous. It's sure to be coming out. The papers will be having it next. You're young yet. Your life is before you. I tremble for your soul, but so long as you're young and alive, you may come to your senses. It's me duty to be hard. It's my obligation to you and the Church. You must quit this life. You must leave this man. You must never see him any more. I can't permit you. He's no good. He has no intention of marrying you, and it would be a crime against God and man if he did. No, no, never that. The man's a bankrupt, a scoundrel, a thief. If you had him, you'd soon be the unhappiest woman in the world. He wouldn't be faithful to you. No, he couldn't. He's not that kind." He paused, sick to the depths of his soul. "You must go away. I say it once and for all. I mean it kindly. But I want it. I have your best interest at heart. I love you, but you must. I'm sorry to see you go. I'd rather have you here. No one will be sorrier, but you must. You must make it all seem natural and ordinary to your mother. But you must go, do you hear? You must." He paused, looking sadly but firmly at Eileen under his shaggy eyebrows. She knew he meant this. It was his most solemn, his most religious expression. But she did not answer. She could not. What was the use? Only she was not going. She knew that, and so she stood there white and tense. "Now get all your clothes you want," went on Butler, by no means grasping her true mood. "Fix yourself up in any way you please. Say where you want to go, but get ready." "But I won't, Father," finally replied Eileen, equally solemnly, equally determinedly. "I won't go. I won't leave Philadelphia." "You don't mean to say you will deliberately disobey me when I'm asking you to do something that's intended for your own good, will you, daughter?" "Yes, I will," replied Eileen determinedly. "I won't go. I'm sorry, but I won't." "You really mean that, do you?" asked Butler sadly but grimly. "Yes, I do," replied Eileen, grimly in return. "Then I'll have to see what I can do, daughter," replied the old man. "You're still my daughter, whatever you are, and I'll not see you come to wreck and ruin for want of doing what I know to be my solemn duty. I'll give you a few more days to think this over, but go you must. There's an end of that. There are laws in this land still. There are things that can be done to those who won't obey the law. I found you this time, much as it hurt me to do it. I'll find you again if you try to disobey me. You must change your ways. I can't have you going on as you are. You understand now? It's the last word. Give this man up, and you can have anything you choose. You're my girl. I'll do everything I can in this world to make you happy. Why shouldn't I? What else have I to live for but me children? It's ye and the rest of them that I've been working and planning for all these years. Come now, be a good girl. You love your old father, don't you? Why, I rocked you in my arms as a baby, Eileen. I've watched over you when you were not bigger than what would rest in me 2 fists here. I've been a good father to you. You can't deny that. Look at the other girls you've seen. Have any of them had more nor what ye have had? You won't go against me in this. I'm sure you won't. You can't. You love me too much. Surely you do, don't you? His voice weakened. His eyes almost filled. He paused and put a big, brown, horny hand on Eileen's arm. She had listened to his plea not unmoved, really more or less softened because of the hopelessness of it. She could not give up Cowperwood. Her father just did not understand. He did not know what love was. Unquestionably, he had never loved as she had. She stood quite silent while Butler appealed to her. "I'd like to, Father," she said at last, and softly, tenderly. "Really, I would. I do love you. Yes, I do. I want to please you. But I can't in this. I can't. I love Frank Cowperwood. You don't understand. Really, you don't." At the repetition of Cowperwood's name, Butler's mouth hardened. He could see that she was infatuated, that his carefully calculated plea had failed. So he must think of some other way. "Very well, then," he said at last, and sadly, oh, so sadly, as Eileen turned away. "Have it your own way, if you will. You must go, though, willy-nilly. It can't be any other way. I wish to God it could." Eileen went out, very solemn, and Butler went over to his desk and sat down. "Such a situation," he said to himself. "Such a complication." Chapter 38. The situation which confronted Eileen was really a trying one. A girl of less innate courage and determination would have weakened and yielded, for in spite of her various social connections and acquaintances, the people to whom Eileen could run in an emergency of the present kind were not numerous. She could scarcely think of anyone who would be likely to take her in for any lengthy period without question. There were a number of young women of her own age, married and unmarried, who were very friendly to her, but there were few with whom she was really intimate. The only person who stood out in her mind as having any real possibility of refuge for a period was a certain Mary Callaghan, better known as Mamie, among her friends, who had attended school with Eileen in former years and was now a teacher in one of the local schools. The Callaghan family consisted of Mrs. Catherine Callaghan, the mother, a dressmaker by profession and a widow, her husband, a house mover by trade, having been killed by a falling wall some 10 years before, and Mamie, her 23-year-old daughter. They lived in a small 2-story brick house in Cherry Street near 15th. Mrs. Callaghan was not a very good dressmaker, not good enough, at least, for the Butler family to patronize in their present exalted state. Eileen went there occasionally for gingham house dresses, underwear, pretty dressing gowns, and alterations on some of her more important clothing, which was made by a very superior modiste in Chestnut Street. She visited the house largely because she had gone to school with Mamie at St. Agatha's, when the outlook of the Callaghan family was much more promising. Mamie was earning $40 a month as the teacher of a 6th-grade room in one of the nearby public schools, and Mrs. Callaghan averaged, on the whole, about $2 a day, sometimes not so much. The house they occupied was their own, free and clear, and the furniture which it contained suggested the size of their joint income, which was somewhere near $80 a month. Mamie Callaghan was not good-looking, not nearly as good-looking as her mother had been before her. Mrs. Callaghan was still plump, bright, and cheerful at 50, with a fund of good humor. Mamie was somewhat duller mentally and emotionally. She was serious-minded, made so, perhaps, as much by circumstances as by anything else, for she was not at all vivid and had little sex magnetism. Yet she was kindly, honest, earnest, a good Catholic, and possessed of that strangely excessive ingrowing virtue which shuts so many people off from the world, a sense of duty. To Mamie Callaghan, duty, a routine conformity to such theories and precepts as she had heard and worked by since her childhood, was the all-important thing, her principal source of comfort and relief. Her props in a queer and uncertain world being her duty to her church, her duty to her school, her duty to her mother, her duty to her friends, etc. Her mother often wished for Mamie's sake that she was less dutiful and more charming physically, so that the men would like her. In spite of the fact that her mother was a dressmaker, Mamie's clothes never looked smart or attractive. She would have felt out of keeping with herself if they had. Her shoes were rather large and ill-fitting. Her skirt hung in lifeless lines from her hips to her feet, of good material, but seemingly bad design. At that time the colored jersey, so-called, was just coming into popular wear, and, being close-fitting, looked well on those of good form. Alas for Mamie Callaghan! The mode of the time compelled her to wear one, but she had neither the arms nor the chest development, which made this garment admirable. Her hat, by choice, was usually a pancake affair with a long single feather, which somehow never seemed to be in exactly the right position, either to her hair or her face. At most times she looked a little weary, but she was not physically weary so much as she was bored. Her life held so little of real charm, and Eileen Butler was unquestionably the most significant element of romance in it. Mamie's mother's very pleasant social disposition, the fact that they had a very cleanly, if poor, little home, that she could entertain them by playing on their piano, and that Mrs. Callaghan took an adoring interest in the work she did for her, made up the sum and substance of the attraction of the Callaghan home for Eileen. She went there occasionally as a relief from other things, and because Mamie Callaghan had a compatible and very understanding interest in literature. Curiously, the books Eileen liked, she liked. Jane Eyre, Kenelm Chillingly, Tricotrin, and A Bow of Orange Ribbon. Mamie occasionally recommended to Eileen some latest effusion of this character, and Eileen, finding her judgment good, was constrained to admire her. In this crisis it was to the home of the Callaghans that Eileen turned in thought. If her father really was not nice to her, and she had to leave home for a time, she could go to the Callaghans. They would receive her and say nothing. They were not sufficiently well known to the other members of the Butler family to have the latter suspect that she had gone there. She might readily disappear into the privacy of Cherry Street, and not be seen or heard of for weeks. It is an interesting fact to contemplate that the Callaghans, like the various members of the Butler family, never suspected Eileen of the least tendency toward a wayward existence. Hence, her flight from her own family, if it ever came, would be laid more to the door of a temperamental pettishness than anything else. On the other hand, in so far as the Butler family as a unit was concerned, it needed Eileen more than she needed it. It needed the light of her countenance to keep it appropriately cheerful, and if she went away there would be a distinct gulf that would not soon be overcome. Butler, Sr., for instance, had seen his little daughter grow into radiantly beautiful womanhood. He had seen her go to school and convent and learn to play the piano, to him a great accomplishment. Also, he had seen her manner change and become very showy, and her knowledge of life broaden, apparently, and become, to him at least, impressive. Her smart, dogmatic views about most things were, to him, at least, well worth listening to. She knew more about books and art than Owen or Callum, and her sense of social manners was perfect. When she came to the table, breakfast, luncheon, or dinner, she was to him always a charming object to see. He had produced Eileen. He congratulated himself. He had furnished her the money to be so fine. He would continue to do so. No second-rate upstart of a man should be allowed to ruin her life. He proposed to take care of her always, to leave her so much money in a legally involved way that a failure of a husband could not possibly affect her. "You're the charming lady this evening, I'm thinking," was one of his pet remarks, and also, "My, but we're that fine." At table, almost invariably, she sat beside him and looked out for him. That was what he wanted. He had put her there beside him at his meals years before, when she was a child. Her mother, too, was inordinately fond of her, and Callum and Owen appropriately brotherly. So Eileen had thus far at least paid back with beauty and interest quite as much as she received, and all the family felt it to be so. When she was away for a day or two, the house seemed glum, the meals less appetizing. When she returned, all were happy and gay again. Eileen understood this clearly enough in a way. Now, when it came to thinking of leaving and shifting for herself, in order to avoid a trip which she did not care to be forced into, her courage was based largely on this keen sense of her own significance to the family. She thought over what her father had said, and decided she must act at once. She dressed for the street the next morning, after her father had gone, and decided to step in at the Callaghans about noon, when Mamie would be at home for luncheon. Then she would take up the matter casually. If they had no objection, she would go there. She sometimes wondered why Cowperwood did not suggest, in his great stress, that they leave for some parts unknown, but she also felt that he must know best what he could do. His increasing troubles depressed her. Mrs. Callaghan was alone when she arrived and was delighted to see her. After exchanging the gossip of the day, and not knowing quite how to proceed in connection with the errand which had brought her, she went to the piano and played a melancholy air. "Sure, it's lovely the way you play, Eileen," observed Mrs. Callaghan, who was unduly sentimental herself. "I love to hear you. I wish you'd come oftener to see us. You're so rarely here nowadays." "Oh, I've been so busy, Mrs. Callaghan," replied Eileen. "I've had so much to do this fall. I just couldn't. They wanted me to go to Europe, but I didn't care to. Oh, dear." She sighed, and in her playing swept off with a movement of sad, romantic significance. The door opened, and Mamie came in. Her commonplace face brightened at the sight of Eileen. "Well, Eileen Butler!" she exclaimed. "Where did you come from? Where have you been keeping yourself so long?" Eileen rose to exchange kisses. "Oh, I've been very busy, Mamie. I've just been telling your mother. How are you, anyway? How are you getting along in your work?" Mamie recounted at once some school difficulties which were puzzling her, the growing size of classes and the amount of work expected. While Mrs. Callaghan was setting the table, Mamie went to her room and Eileen followed her. As she stood before her mirror arranging her hair, Eileen looked at her meditatively. "What's the matter with you, Eileen, today?" Mamie asked. "You look so—" She stopped to give her a second glance. "How do I look?" asked Eileen. "Well, as if you were uncertain or troubled about something. I never saw you look that way before. What's the matter?" "Oh, nothing," replied Eileen. "I was just thinking." She went to one of the windows which looked into the little yard, meditating on whether she could endure living here for any length of time. The house was so small, the furnishings so very simple. "There is something the matter with you today, Eileen," observed Mamie, coming over to her and looking in her face. "You're not like yourself at all." "I've got something on my mind," replied Eileen. "Something that's worrying me. I don't know just what to do. That's what's the matter." "Well, whatever can it be?" commented Mamie. "I never saw you act this way before. Can't you tell me? What is it?" "No, I don't think I can. Not now, anyhow." Eileen paused. "Do you suppose your mother would object?" she asked suddenly, "if I came here and stayed a little while? I want to get away from home for a time for a certain reason." "Why, Eileen Butler, how you talk!" exclaimed her friend. "Object? You know she'd be delighted, and so would I. Oh, dear, can you come? But what makes you want to leave home?" "That's just what I can't tell you. Not now, anyhow. Not you so much, but your mother. You know, I'm afraid of what she'd think," replied Eileen. "But you mustn't ask me yet, anyhow. I want to think. Oh, dear, but I want to come, if you'll let me. Will you speak to your mother, or shall I?" "Why, I will," said Mamie, struck with wonder at this remarkable development. "But it's silly to do it. I know what she'll say before I tell her, and so do you. You can just bring your things and come, that's all. She'd never say anything or ask anything either, and you know that, if you didn't want her to." Mamie was all agog and aglow at the idea. She wanted the companionship of Eileen so much. Eileen looked at her solemnly and understood well enough why she was so enthusiastic, both she and her mother. Both wanted her presence to brighten their world. "But neither of you must tell anybody that I'm here, do you hear? I don't want anyone to know, particularly no one of my family. I've a reason, and a good one, but I can't tell you what it is, not now, anyhow. You'll promise not to tell anyone?" "Oh, of course," replied Mamie eagerly. "But you're not going to run away for good, are you, Eileen?" she concluded curiously and gravely. "Oh, I don't know. I don't know what I'll do yet. I only know that I want to get away for a while, just now. That's all." She paused, while Mamie stood before her, agape. "Well, of all things," replied her friend. "Wonders never cease, do they, Eileen? But it will be so lovely to have you here. Mamma will be so pleased. Of course, we won't tell anybody if you don't want us to. Hardly anyone ever comes here, and if they do, you needn't see them. You could have this big room next to me. Oh, wouldn't that be nice? I'm perfectly delighted." The young school-teacher's spirits rose to a decided height. "Come on, why not tell Mamma right now?" Eileen hesitated because even now she was not positive whether she should do this, but finally they went down the stairs together, Eileen lingering behind a little as they neared the bottom. Mamie burst in upon her mother with, "Oh, Mamma, isn't it lovely? Eileen's coming to stay with us for a while. She doesn't want anyone to know, and she's coming right away." Mrs. Callaghan, who was holding a sugar bowl in her hand, turned to survey her with a surprised but smiling face. She was immediately curious as to why Eileen should want to come, why leave home. On the other hand, her feeling for Eileen was so deep that she was greatly and joyously intrigued by the idea. And why not? Was not the celebrated Edward Butler's daughter a woman grown, capable of regulating her own affairs, and welcome, of course, as the honored member of so important a family? It was very flattering to the Calligans to think that she would want to come under any circumstances. "I don't see how your parents can let you go, Eileen, but you're certainly welcome here as long as you want to stay, and that's forever if you want to." And Mrs. Callaghan beamed on her welcomely. The idea of Eileen Butler asking to be permitted to come here, and the hearty, comprehending manner in which she said this, and Mamie's enthusiasm, caused Eileen to breathe a sigh of relief. The matter of the expense of her presence to the Calligans came into her mind. "I want to pay you, of course," she said to Mrs. Callaghan, "if I come." "The very idea, Eileen Butler!" exclaimed Mamie. "You'll do nothing of the sort. You'll come here and live with me as my guest." "No, I won't. If I can't pay, I won't come," replied Eileen. "You'll have to let me do that." She knew that the Calligans could not afford to keep her. "Well, we'll not talk about that now, anyhow," replied Mrs. Callaghan. "You can come when you like and stay long as you like. Reach me some clean napkins, Mamie." Eileen remained for luncheon and left soon afterward to keep her suggested appointment with Cowperwood, feeling satisfied that her main problem had been solved. Now her way was clear. She could come here if she wanted to. It was simply a matter of collecting a few necessary things, or coming without bringing anything. Perhaps Frank would have something to suggest. In the meantime, Cowperwood made no effort to communicate with Eileen since the unfortunate discovery of their meeting place, but had awaited a letter from her, which was not long in coming. And, as usual, it was a long, optimistic, affectionate, and defiant screed in which she related all that had occurred to her and her present plan of leaving home. This last puzzled and troubled him not a little. Eileen in the bosom of her family, smart and well cared for, was one thing. Eileen out in the world dependent on him was another. He had never imagined that she would be compelled to leave before he was prepared to take her. And if she did now, it might stir up complications which would be anything but pleasant to contemplate. Still, he was fond of her, very, and would do anything to make her happy. He could support her in a very respectable way even now, if he did not eventually go to prison, and even there he might manage to make some shift for her. It would be so much better, though, if he could persuade her to remain at home until he knew exactly what his fate was to be. He never doubted but that some day, whatever happened, within a reasonable length of time, he would be rid of all these complications and well-to-do again, in which case, if he could get a divorce, he wanted to marry Eileen. If not, he would take her with him anyhow, and from this point of view it might be just as well as if she broke away from her family now. But from the point of view of present complications, the search Butler would make, it might be dangerous. He might even publicly charge him with abduction. He therefore decided to persuade Eileen to stay at home, drop meetings and communications for the time being, and even go abroad. It would be all right until she came back, and so would she. Common sense ought to rule in this case. With all this in mind, he set out to keep the appointment she suggested in her letter, nevertheless feeling it a little dangerous to do so. "Are you sure," he asked, after he had listened to her description of the Callaghan homestead, "that you would like it there? It sounds rather poor to me." "Yes, but I like them so much," replied Eileen. "And you're sure they won't tell on you?" "Oh, no, never, never." "Very well," he concluded. "You know what you're doing. I don't want to advise you against your will. If I were you, though, I'd take your father's advice and go away for a while. He'll get over this then, and I'll still be here. I can write you occasionally, and you can write me." The moment Cowperwood said this, Eileen's brow clouded. Her love for him was so great that there was something like a knife thrust in the merest hint at an extended separation. Her Frank here, and in trouble, on trial maybe, and she away. Never. What could he mean by suggesting such a thing? Could it be that he didn't care for her as much as she did for him? Did he really love her? She asked herself. Was he going to desert her just when she was going to do the thing which would bring them nearer together? Her eyes clouded, and she was terribly hurt. "Why, how you talk!" she exclaimed. "You know I won't leave Philadelphia now. You certainly don't expect me to leave you." Cowperwood saw it all very clearly. He was too shrewd not to. He was immensely fond of her. Good heaven, he thought, he would not hurt her feelings for the world. "Honey," he said quickly when he saw her eyes, "you don't understand. I want you to do what you want to do. You've planned this out in order to be with me, so now you do it. Don't think any more about me or anything I've said. I was merely thinking that it might make matters worse for both of us, but I don't believe it will. You think your father loves you so much that after you're gone he'll change his mind. Very good, go. But we must be very careful, sweet. You and I. Really, we must. This thing is getting serious. If you should go and your father should charge me with abduction, take the public into his confidence and tell all about this, it would be serious for both of us, as much for you as for me, for I'd be convicted sure then, just on that account, if nothing else. And then what? You'd better not try to see me often for the present, not any oftener than we can possibly help. If we had used common sense and stopped when your father got that letter, this wouldn't have happened. But now that it has happened, we must be as wise as we can, don't you see? So think it over and do what you think best, and then write me, and whatever you do will be all right with me. Do you hear? He drew her to him and kissed her. You haven't any money, have you? He concluded wisely. Eileen, deeply moved by all he had just said, was none the less convinced, once she had meditated on it a moment, that her course was best. Her father loved her too much. He would not do anything to hurt her publicly, and so he would not attack Cowperwood through her openly. More than likely, as she now explained to Frank, he would plead with her to come back, and he, listening, was compelled to yield. Why argue? She would not leave him anyhow. He went down in his pocket for the first time since he had known Eileen and produced a layer of bills. "Here's $200, sweet," he said, "until I see or hear from you. I'll see that you have whatever you need, and now don't think I don't love you. You know I do. I'm crazy about you." Eileen protested that she did not need so much, that she did not really need any. She had some at home. But he put that aside. He knew that she must have money. "Don't talk, honey," he said. "I know what you need." She had been so used to receiving money from her father and mother in comfortable amounts from time to time that she thought nothing of it. Frank loved her so much that it made everything right between them. She softened in her mood, and they discussed the matter of letters, reaching the conclusion that a private messenger would be safest. When finally they parted, Eileen, from being sunk in the depths by his uncertain attitude, was now once more on the heights. She decided that he did love her, and went away smiling. She had her Frank to fall back on. She would teach her father. Cowperwood shook his head, following her with his eyes. She represented an additional burden, but give her up he certainly could not. Tear the veil from this illusion of affection, and make her feel so wretched when he cared for her so much? No. There was really nothing for him to do but what he had done. After all, he reflected, it might not work out so badly. Any detective work that Butler might choose to do would prove that she had not run to him. If at any moment it became necessary to bring common sense into play to save the situation from a deadly climax, he could have the Butlers secretly informed as to Eileen's whereabouts. That would show he had little to do with it, and they could try to persuade Eileen to come home again. Good might result. One could not tell. He would deal with the evils as they arose. He drove quickly back to his office, and Eileen returned to her home determined to put her plan into action. Her father had given her some little time in which to decide. Possibly he would give her longer, but she would not wait. Having always had her wish granted in everything, she could not understand why she was not to have her way this time. It was about 5 o'clock now. She would wait until all the members of the family were comfortably seated at the dinner table, which would be about 7 o'clock, and then slip out. On arriving home, however, she was greeted by an unexpected reason for suspending action. This was the presence of a certain Mr. and Mrs. Steinmetz, the former a well-known engineer who drew the plans for many of the works which Butler undertook. It was the day before Thanksgiving, and they were eager to have Eileen and Nora accompany them for a fortnight's stay at their new home in Westchester, a structure concerning the charm of which Eileen had heard much. They were exceedingly agreeable people, comparatively young and surrounded by a coterie of interesting friends. Eileen decided to delay her flight and go. Her father was most cordial. The presence and invitation of the Steinmetzes was as much a relief to him as it was to Eileen. Westchester being 40 miles from Philadelphia, it was unlikely that Eileen would attempt to meet Cowperwood while there. She wrote Cowperwood of the changed condition and departed, and he breathed a sigh of relief, fancying at the time that this storm had permanently blown over. Chapter 39. In the meantime, the day of Cowperwood's trial was drawing near. He was under the impression that an attempt was going to be made to convict him, whether the facts warranted it or not. He did not see any way out of his dilemma, however, unless it was to abandon everything and leave Philadelphia for good, which was impossible. The only way to guard his future and retain his financial friends was to stand trial as quickly as possible and trust them to assist him to his feet in the future in case he failed. He discussed the possibilities of an unfair trial with Steger, who did not seem to think that there was so much to that. In the first place, a jury could not easily be suborned by anyone. In the next place, most judges were honest, in spite of their political cleavage, and would go no further than party bias would lead them in their rulings and opinions, which was, in the main, not so far. The particular judge who was to sit in this case, one Wilbur Pedersen of the Court of Quarter Sessions, was a strict party nominee, and as such beholden to Mollenhauer, Simpson, and Butler. But in so far as Steger had ever heard, he was an honest man. "What I can't understand," said Steger, "is why these fellows should be so anxious to punish you, unless it is for the effect on the state at large. The election's over. I understand there's a movement on now to get Stenner out in case he is convicted, which he will be. They have to try him. He won't go up for more than a year or 2 or 3, and if he does, he'll be pardoned out in half the time or less. It would be the same in your case if you were convicted. Well, they couldn't keep you in and let him out. But it will never get that far. Take my word for it. We'll win before a jury, or we'll reverse the judgment of conviction before the state Supreme Court, certain. Those 5 judges up there are not going to sustain any such poppycock idea as this." Steger actually believed what he said, and Cowperwood was pleased. Thus far, the young lawyer had done excellently well in all of his cases. Still, he did not like the idea of being hunted down by Butler. It was a serious matter, and one of which Steger was totally unaware. Cowperwood could never quite forget that in listening to his lawyer's optimistic assurances. The actual beginning of the trial found almost all of the inhabitants of the city of 600,000 keyed up. None of the women of Cowperwood's family were coming into court. He had insisted that there should be no family demonstration for the newspapers to comment upon. His father was coming, for he might be needed as a witness. Eileen had written him the afternoon before, saying she had returned from Westchester and wishing him luck. She was so anxious to know what was to become of him that she could not stay away any longer and had returned, not to go to the courtroom, for he did not want her to do that, but to be as near as possible when his fate was decided, adversely or otherwise. She wanted to run and congratulate him if he won, or to console him if he lost. She felt that her return would be likely to precipitate a collision with her father, but she could not help that. The position of Mrs. Cowperwood was most anomalous. She had to go through the formality of seeming affectionate and tender, even when she knew that Frank did not want her to be. He felt instinctively now that she knew of Eileen. He was merely awaiting the proper hour in which to spread the whole matter before her. She put her arms around him at the door on the fateful morning, in that somewhat formal manner into which they had dropped these later years, and for a moment, even though she was keenly aware of his difficulties, she could not kiss him. He did not want to kiss her, but he did not show it. She did kiss him, though, and added, "Oh, I do hope things come out all right." "You needn't worry about that, I think, Lillian," he replied buoyantly. "I'll be all right." He ran down the steps and walked out on Girard Avenue to his former car line, where he boarded a car. He was thinking of Eileen and how keenly she was feeling for him, and what a mockery his married life now was, and whether he would face a sensible jury, and so on and so forth. If he didn't, this day was crucial. He stepped off the car at 3rd and Market and hurried to his office. Steger was already there. "Well, Harper," observed Cowperwood courageously, "today's the day." The Court of Quarter Sessions, Part 1, where this trial was to take place, was held in famous Independence Hall at 6th and Chestnut Streets, which was at this time, as it had been for all of a century before, the center of local, executive, and judicial life. It was a low 2-story building of red brick, with a white wooden central tower of Old Dutch and English derivation, compounded of the square, the circle, and the octagon. The total structure consisted of a central portion and 2 T-shaped wings lying to the right and left, whose small, oval-topped, old-fashioned windows and doors were set with those many-paned sashes so much admired by those who love what is known as colonial architecture. Here, and in an addition known as State House Row, since torn down, which extended from the rear of the building toward Walnut Street, were located the offices of the mayor, the chief of police, the city treasurer, the chambers of council, and all the other important and executive offices of the city, together with the 4 branches of Quarter Sessions, which sat to hear the growing docket of criminal cases. The mammoth City Hall, which was subsequently completed at Broad and Market Streets, was then building. An attempt had been made to improve the reasonably large courtrooms by putting them in raised platforms of dark walnut surmounted by large dark walnut desks, behind which the judges sat. But the attempt was not very successful. The desks, jury boxes, and railings generally were made too large, and so the general effect was one of disproportion. A cream-colored wall had been thought the appropriate thing to go with black walnut furniture, but time and dust had made the combination dreary. There were no pictures or ornaments of any kind, save the stocky, over-elaborated gas brackets which stood on the honor's desk, and the single swinging chandelier suspended from the center of the ceiling. Fat bailiffs and court officers, concerned only in holding their workless jobs, did not add anything to the spirit of the scene. Two of them, in the particular court in which this trial was held, contended hourly as to which should hand the judge a glass of water. One preceded his honor like a fat, stuffy, dusty major-domo to and from his dressing-room. His business was to call loudly when the latter entered, "His honor, the court, hats off, everybody please rise," while a second bailiff, standing at the left of his honor when he was seated, and between the jury box and the witness chair, recited in an absolutely unintelligible way that beautiful and dignified statement of collective society's obligation to the constituent units, which begins, "Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye," and ends, "All those of you having just cause for complaint, draw near, and ye shall be heard." However, you would have thought that it was of no import here. Custom and indifference had allowed it to sink to a mumble. A third bailiff guarded the door of the jury room, and in addition to these there were present a court clerk, small, pale, candle-waxy, with colorless milk-and-water eyes and thin pork-fat-colored hair and beard, who looked for all the world like an Americanized and decidedly decrepit Chinese mandarin, and a court stenographer. Judge Wilbur Paterson, a lean herring of a man, who had sat in this case originally as the examining judge when Cowperwood had been indicted by the grand jury, and who had bound him over for trial at this term, was a peculiarly interesting type of judge as judges go. He was so meager and thin-blooded that he was arresting for those qualities alone. Technically, he was learned in the law. Actually, so far as life was concerned, absolutely unconscious of that subtle chemistry of things that transcends all written law and makes for the spirit, and beyond that, the inutility of all law, as all wise judges know. You could have looked at his lean, pedantic body, his frizzled gray hair, his fishy, blue-gray eyes, without any depth of speculation in them, and his nicely modeled but unimportant face, and told him that he was without imagination. But he would not have believed you, would have fined you for contempt of court. By the careful garnering of all his little opportunities, the furbishing up of every meager advantage, by listening slavishly to the voice of party, and following as nearly as he could the behests of entrenched property, he had reached his present state. It was not very far along at that. His salary was only $6,000 a year. His little fame did not extend beyond the meager realm of local lawyers and judges. But the sight of his name quoted daily as being about his duties, or rendering such and such a decision, was a great satisfaction to him. He thought it made him a significant figure in the world. "Behold, I am not as other men," he often thought, and this comforted him. He was very much flattered when a prominent case came to his calendar, and as he sat enthroned before the various litigants and lawyers he felt, as a rule, very significant indeed. Now and then some subtlety of life would confuse his really limited intellect, but in all such cases there was the letter of the law. He could hunt in the reports to find out what really thinking men had decided. Besides, lawyers everywhere are so subtle. They put the rules of law, favorable or unfavorable, under the judge's thumb and nose. "Your Honor, in the 32nd volume of the Revised Reports of Massachusetts, page so-and-so, line so-and-so, in Arundel versus Bannerman, you will find, etc." How often have you heard that in a court of law? The reasoning that is left to do in most cases is not much, and the sanctity of the law is raised like a great banner by which the pride of the incumbent is strengthened. Paterson, as Steger had indicated, could scarcely be pointed to as an unjust judge. He was a party judge, Republican in principle, or rather belief, beholden to the dominant party councils for his personal continuance in office, and as such willing and anxious to do whatever he considered that he reasonably could do to further the party welfare and the private interests of his masters. Most people never trouble to look into the mechanics of the things they call their conscience too closely. Where they do, too often they lack the skill to disentangle the tangled threads of ethics and morals, whatever the opinion of the time is, whatever the weight of great interests dictates, that they conscientiously believe. Someone has since invented the phrase, "a corporation-minded judge." There are many such. Paterson was one. He fairly revered property and power. To him Butler and Mollenhauer and Simpson were great men, reasonably sure to be right always because they were so powerful. This matter of Cowperwood's and Stener's defalcation he had long heard of. He knew by associating with one political light and another just what the situation was. The party, as the leaders saw it, had been put in a very bad position by Cowperwood's subtlety. He had led Stener astray, more than any ordinary city treasurer should have been led astray, and although Stener was primarily guilty as the original mover in the scheme, Cowperwood was more so for having led him imaginatively to such disastrous lengths. Besides, the party needed a scapegoat. That was enough for Paterson in the first place. Of course, after the election had been won, and it appeared that the party had not suffered so much, he did not understand quite why it was that Cowperwood was still so carefully included in the proceedings. But he had faith to believe that the leaders had some just grounds for not letting him off. From one source and another he learned that Butler had some private grudge against Cowperwood. What it was no one seemed to know exactly. The general impression was that Cowperwood had led Butler into some unwholesome financial transactions. Anyhow, it was generally understood that for the good of the party, and in order to teach a wholesome lesson to dangerous subordinates, it had been decided to allow these several indictments to take their course. Cowperwood was to be punished quite as severely as Stener for the moral effect on the community. Stener was to be sentenced the maximum sentence for his crime in order that the party and the courts should appear properly righteous. Beyond that, he was to be left to the mercy of the governor, who could ease things up for him if he chose, and if the leaders wished. In the silly mind of the general public, the various judges of quarter sessions, like girls incarcerated in boarding schools, were supposed, in their serene aloofness from life, not to know what was going on in the subterranean realm of politics. But they knew well enough, and knowing particularly well from whence came their continued position and authority, they were duly grateful. Chapter 40. When Cowperwood came into the crowded courtroom with his father and Steger, quite fresh and jaunty, looking the part of the shrewd financier, the man of affairs, everyone stared. It was really too much to expect. Most of them thought that a man like this would be convicted. He was no doubt guilty, but also, no doubt, he had ways and means of evading the law. His lawyer, Harper Steger, looked very shrewd and canny to them. It was very cold, and both men wore long, dark, bluish-gray overcoats cut in the latest mode. Cowperwood was given to small boutonnières in fair weather, but today he wore none. His tie, however, was of heavy, impressive silk, of lavender hue, set with a large, clear green emerald. He wore only the thinnest of watch-chains, and no other ornament of any kind. He always looked jaunty, and yet reserved, good-natured, and yet capable and self-sufficient. Never had he looked more so than he did today. He at once took in the nature of the scene, which had a peculiar interest for him. Before him was the as-yet empty judge's rostrum, and at its right the empty jury box, between which, and to the judge's left, as he sat facing the audience, stood the witness chair where he must presently sit and testify. Behind it, already awaiting the arrival of the court, stood a fat bailiff, one John Sparkheaver, whose business it was to present the aged, greasy Bible to be touched by the witnesses in making oath, and to say, "Step this way," when the testimony was over. There were other bailiffs, one at the gate giving into the railed space before the judge's desk, where prisoners were arraigned, lawyers sat or pleaded, the defendant had a chair, and so on. Another in the aisle leading to the jury room, and still another guarding the door by which the public entered. Cowperwood surveyed Stener, who was one of the witnesses, and who now, in his helpless fright over his own fate, was without malice toward anyone. He had never really borne any. He wished, if anything now, that he had followed Cowperwood's advice, seeing where he now was, though he still had faith that Mollenhauer and the political powers represented by him would do something for him with the governor once he was sentenced. He was very pale and comparatively thin. Already he had lost that ruddy bulk which he had added during the days of his prosperity. He wore a new gray suit and a brown tie, and was clean-shaven. When his eye caught Cowperwood's steady beam, it faltered and drooped. He rubbed his ear foolishly. Cowperwood nodded. "You know," he said to Steger, "I feel sorry for George. He's such a fool. Still, I did all I could." Cowperwood also watched Mrs. Stener out of the tail of his eye, an undersized, peaked, and sallow little woman whose clothes fitted her abominably. It was just like Stener to marry a woman like that, he thought. The scrubby matches of the socially unelect or unfit always interested, though they did not always amuse him. Mrs. Stener had no affection for Cowperwood, of course, looking on him, as she did, as the unscrupulous cause of her husband's downfall. They were now quite poor again, about to move from their big house into cheaper quarters, and this was not pleasing for her to contemplate. Judge Peterson came in after a time, accompanied by his undersized but stout court attendant, who looked more like a pouter pigeon than a human being. And as they came, Bailiff Sparkheaver rapped on the judge's desk, besides which he had been slumbering, and mumbled, "Please rise." The audience arose, as is the rule of all courts. Judge Peterson stirred among a number of briefs that were lying on his desk, and asked briskly, "What's the first case, Mr. Protus?" He was speaking to his clerk. During the long and tedious arraignment of the day's docket, and while the various minor motions of lawyers were being considered, this courtroom scene still retained interest for Cowperwood. He was so eager to win, so incensed at the outcome of untoward events which had brought him here. He was always intensely irritated, though he did not show it, by the whole process of footing delays and queries and quibbles, by which legally the affairs of men were too often hampered. Law, if you had asked him, and he had accurately expressed himself, was a mist formed out of the moods and the mistakes of men, which befogged the sea of life and prevented plain sailing for the little commercial and social barks of men. It was a miasma of misinterpretation, where the ills of life festered, and also a place where the accidentally wounded were ground between the upper and nether millstones of force or chance. It was a strange, weird, interesting, and yet futile battle of wits, where the ignorant and the incompetent and the shrewd and the angry and the weak were made pawns and shuttlecocks for men, lawyers who were playing upon their moods, their vanities, their desires, and their necessities. It was an unholy and unsatisfactory disrupting and delaying spectacle, a painful commentary on the frailties of life and men, a trick, a snare, a pit and gin. In the hands of the strong, like himself, when he was at his best, the law was a sword and a shield, a trap to place before the feet of the unwary, a pit to dig in the path of those who might pursue. It was anything you might choose to make of it, a door to illegal opportunity, a cloud of dust to be cast in the eyes of those who might choose, and rightfully, to see, a veil to be dropped arbitrarily between truth and its execution, justice and its judgment, crime and punishment. Lawyers in the main were intellectual mercenaries to be bought and sold in any cause. It amused him to hear the ethical and emotional platitudes of lawyers, to see how readily they would lie, steal, prevaricate, misrepresent in almost any cause and for any purpose. Great lawyers were merely great unscrupulous subtleties, like himself, sitting back in dark, close-woven lairs, like spiders, and awaiting the approach of unwary human flies. Life was at best a dark, inhuman, unkind, unsympathetic struggle built of cruelties and the law, and its lawyers were the most despicable representatives of the whole unsatisfactory mess. Still, he used law as he would use any other trap or weapon to rid him of a human ill, and as for lawyers, he picked them up as he would any club or knife wherewith to defend himself. He had no particular respect for any of them, not even Harper Steger, though he liked him. They were tools to be used, knives, keys, clubs, anything you will, but nothing more. When they were through, they were paid and dropped, put aside and forgotten. As for judges, they were merely incompetent lawyers, as a rule, who were shelved by some fortunate turn of chance, and who would not, in all likelihood, be as efficient as the lawyers who pleaded before them if they were put in the same position. He had no respect for judges. He knew too much about them. He knew how often they were sycophants, political climbers, political hacks, tools, time-servers, judicial doormats lying before the financially and politically great and powerful, who used them as such. Judges were fools, as were most other people in this dusty, shifty world. Pah! His inscrutable eyes took them all in and gave no sign. His only safety lay, he thought, in the magnificent subtlety of his own brain and nowhere else. You could not convince Cowperwood of any great or inherent virtue in this mortal scheme of things. He knew too much. He knew himself. When the judge finally cleared away the various minor motions pending, he ordered his clerk to call the case of the City of Philadelphia versus Frank A. Cowperwood, which was done in a clear voice. Both Dennis Shannon, the new district attorney, and Steger were on their feet at once. Steger and Cowperwood, together with Shannon and Strobick, who had now come in and was standing as the representative of the state of Pennsylvania, the complainant, had seated themselves at the long table inside the railing which enclosed the space before the judge's desk. Steger proposed to Judge Peterson, for effect's sake more than anything else, that this indictment be quashed, but was overruled. A jury to try the case was now quickly impaneled, 12 men out of the usual list called to serve for the month, and was then ready to be challenged by the opposing counsel. The business of impaneling a jury was a rather simple thing, so far as this court was concerned. It consisted in the Mandarin-like clerk taking the names of all the jurors called to serve in this court for the month, some 50 in all, and putting them, each written on a separate slip of paper, in a whirling drum, spinning it around a few times, and then lifting out the first slip which his hand encountered, thus glorifying chance and settling on who would be juror number 1. His hand reaching in 12 times drew out the names of the 12 jurymen, who, as their names were called, were ordered to take their places in the jury box. Cowperwood observed this proceeding with a great deal of interest. What could be more important than the men who were going to try him? The process was too swift for accurate judgment, but he received a faint impression of middle-class men. One man in particular, however, an old man of 65, with iron-gray hair and beard, shaggy eyebrows, sallow complexion, and stooped shoulders, struck him as having that kindness of temperament and breadth of experience which might, under certain circumstances, be argumentatively swayed in his favor. Another, a small, sharp-nosed, sharp-chinned commercial man of some kind, he immediately disliked. "I hope I don't have to have that man on my jury," he said to Steger quietly. "You don't," replied Steger. "I'll challenge him. We have the right to 15 peremptory challenges on a case like this, and so has the prosecution." When the jury box was finally full, the 2 lawyers waited for the clerk to bring them the small board upon which slips of paper bearing the names of the 12 jurors were fastened in rows in order of their selection, jurors 1, 2, and 3 being in the first row, 4, 5, and 6 in the second, and so on. It being the prerogative of the attorney for the prosecution to examine and challenge the jurors first, Shannon arose and, taking the board, began to question them as to their trades or professions, their knowledge of the case before the court, and their possible prejudice for or against the prisoner. It was the business of both Steger and Shannon to find men who knew a little something of finance, and could understand a peculiar situation of this kind without any of them, looking at it from Steger's point of view, having any prejudice against a man's trying to assist himself by reasonable means to weather a financial storm, or, looking at it from Shannon's point of view, having any sympathy with such means if they bore about them the least suspicion of chicanery, jugglery, or dishonest manipulation of any kind. As both Shannon and Steger in due course observed for themselves in connection with this jury, it was composed of that assorted social fry which the dragnets of the courts, cast into the ocean of the city, bring to the surface for purposes of this sort. It was made up in the main of managers, agents, tradesmen, editors, engineers, architects, furriers, grocers, traveling salesmen, authors, and every other kind of working citizen whose experience had fitted him for service in proceedings of this character. Rarely would you have found a man of great distinction, but very frequently a group of men who were possessed of no small modicum of that interesting quality known as hard common sense. Throughout all this Cowperwood sat quietly examining the men. A young florist with a pale face, a wide speculative forehead, and anemic hands struck him as being sufficiently impressionable to his personal charm to be worthwhile. He whispered as much to Steger. There was a shrewd Jew, a furrier, who was challenged because he had read all of the news of the panic and had lost $2,000 in street railway stocks. There was a stout wholesale grocer with red cheeks, blue eyes, and flaxen hair, who Cowperwood said he thought was stubborn. He was eliminated. There was a thin, dapper manager of a small retail clothing store, very anxious to be excused, who declared falsely that he did not believe in swearing by the Bible. Judge Paterson, eyeing him severely, let him go. There were some 10 more in all, men who knew of Cowperwood, men who admitted they were prejudiced, men who were hidebound Republicans and resentful of this crime, men who knew Stenner, who were pleasantly eliminated. By 12 o'clock, however, a jury reasonably satisfactory to both sides had been chosen. Chapter 41. At 2 o'clock sharp, Dennis Shannon, as district attorney, began his opening address. He stated in a very simple, kindly way, for he had a most engaging manner, that the indictment as here presented charged Mr. Frank A. Cowperwood, who was sitting at the table inside the jury rail, first with larceny, second with embezzlement, third with larceny as bailey, and fourth with embezzlement of a certain sum of money, a specific sum, to wit, $60,000, on a check given him, drawn to his order, October 9, 1871, which was intended to reimburse him for a certain number of certificates of city loan, which he, as agent or bailee of the check, was supposed to have purchased for the city sinking fund on the order of the city treasurer, under some form of agreement, which had been in existence between them, and which had been in force for some time, said fund being intended to take up such certificates as they might mature in the hands of holders, and be presented for payment, for which purpose, however, the check in question had never been used. "Now, gentlemen," said Mr. Shannon very quietly, "before we go into this very simple question of whether Mr. Cowperwood did or did not, on the date in question, get from the city treasurer $60,000, for which he made no honest return, let me explain to you just what the people mean when they charge him first with larceny, second with embezzlement, third with larceny as bailey, and fourth with embezzlement on a check. Now, as you see, there are 4 counts here, as we lawyers term them, and the reason there are 4 counts is as follows. A man may be guilty of larceny and embezzlement at the same time, or of larceny or embezzlement separately, and without being guilty of the other, and the district attorney representing the people might be uncertain, not that he was not guilty of both, but that it might not be possible to present the evidence under one count, so as to ensure his adequate punishment for a crime which in a way involved both. In such cases, gentlemen, it is customary to indict a man under separate counts, as has been done in this case. Now, the 4 counts in this case, in a way, overlap and confirm each other, and it will be your duty, after we have explained their nature and character, and presented the evidence, to say whether the defendant is guilty on one count or the other, or on 2 or 3 of the counts, or on all 4, just as you see fit and proper, or to put it in a better way, as the evidence warrants. Larceny, as you may or may not know, is the act of taking away the goods or chattels of another without his knowledge or consent, and embezzlement is the fraudulent appropriation to one's own use of what is entrusted to one's care and management, especially money. Larceny as bailey, on the other hand, is simply a more definite form of larceny, wherein one fixes the act of carrying away the goods of another without his knowledge or consent on the person to whom the goods were delivered in trust, that is, the agent or bailey. Embezzlement on a check, which constitutes the 4th charge, is simply a more definite form of fixing charge number 2 in an exact way, and signifies appropriating the money on a check given for a certain definite purpose. All of these charges, as you can see, gentlemen, are in a way synonymous. They overlap and overlay each other. The people, through their representative, the district attorney, contend that Mr. Cowperwood, the defendant here, is guilty of all 4 charges. So now, gentlemen, we will proceed to the history of this crime, which proves to me as an individual that this defendant has one of the most subtle and dangerous minds of the criminal financier type, and we hope by witnesses to prove that to you also. Shannon, because the rules of evidence and court procedure here admitted of no interruption of the prosecution in presenting a case, then went on to describe from his own point of view how Cowperwood had first met Stenner, how he had wormed himself into his confidence, how little financial knowledge Stenner had, and so forth, coming down finally to the day the check for $60,000 was given Cowperwood. How Stenner, as treasurer, claimed that he knew nothing of its delivery, which constituted the base of the charge of larceny. How Cowperwood, having it, misappropriated the certificates supposed to have been purchased for the sinking fund, if they were purchased at all of which Shannon said constituted the crimes with which the defendant was charged, and of which he was unquestionably guilty. We have direct and positive evidence of all that we have thus far contended, gentlemen, Mr. Shannon concluded violently. This is not a matter of hearsay or theory, but of fact. You will be shown by direct testimony, which cannot be shaken, just how it was done. If, after you have heard all this, you still think this man is innocent, that he did not commit the crimes with which he is charged, it is your business to acquit him. On the other hand, if you think the witnesses whom we shall put on the stand are telling the truth, then it is your business to convict him, to find a verdict for the people as against the defendant. I thank you for your attention." The jurors stirred comfortably and took positions of ease, in which they thought they were at rest for the time. But their idle comfort was of short duration, for Shannon now called out the name of George W. Stenner, who came hurrying forward, very pale, very flaccid, very tired-looking. His eyes, as he took his seat in the witness chair, laying his hand on the Bible and swearing to tell the truth, roved in a restless, nervous manner. His voice was a little weak as he started to give his testimony. He told first how he had met Cowperwood in the early months of 1866. He could not remember the exact day. It was during his first term as city treasurer. He had been elected to the office in the fall of 1864. He had been troubled about the condition of city loan, which was below par, and which could not be sold by the city legally at anything but par. Cowperwood had been recommended to him by someone, Mr. Strobick, he believed, though he couldn't be sure. It was the custom of city treasurers to employ brokers, or a broker, in a crisis of this kind, and he was merely following what had been the custom. He went on to describe, under steady promptings and questions from the incisive mind of Shannon, just what the nature of his first conversation was. He remembered it fairly well. How Mr. Cowperwood had said he thought he could do what was wanted, how he had gone away and drawn up a plan or thought one out, and how he had returned and laid it before Stenner. Under Shannon's skillful guidance, Stenner elucidated just what this scheme was, which wasn't exactly so flattering to the honesty of men in general as it was a testimonial to their subtlety and skill. After much discussion of Stenner's and Cowperwood's relations, the story finally got down to the preceding October, which, by reason of companionship, long business understanding, mutually prosperous relationship, etc., the place had been reached where, it was explained, Cowperwood was not only handling several millions of city loan annually, buying and selling for the city and trading it generally, but in the bargain had secured some $500,000 worth of city money at an exceedingly low rate of interest, which was being invested for himself and Stenner in profitable streetcar ventures of one kind and another. Stenner was not anxious to be altogether clear on this point, but Shannon, seeing that he was later to prosecute Stenner himself for this very crime of embezzlement, and that Steger would soon follow in cross-examination, was not willing to let him be hazy. Shannon wanted to fix Cowperwood in the minds of the jury as a clever, tricky person, and by degrees he certainly managed to indicate a very subtle-minded man. Occasionally, as one sharp point after another of Cowperwood's skill was brought out and made moderately clear, one juror or another turned to look at Cowperwood, and he, noting this, and in order to impress them all as favorably as possible, merely gazed Stennerward with a steady air of intelligence and comprehension. The examination now came down to the matter of the particular check for $60,000, which Albert Stiers had handed Cowperwood on the afternoon, late, of October 9, 1871. Shannon showed Stenner the check itself. Had he ever seen it? Yes. Where? In the office of District Attorney Petty on October 20th, or thereabouts last. Was that the first time he had seen it? Yes. Had he ever heard about it before then? Yes. When? On October 10th last. Would he kindly tell the jury in his own way just how and under what circumstances he first heard of it then? Stenner twisted uncomfortably in his chair. It was a hard thing to do. It was not a pleasant commentary on his own character and degree of moral stamina, to say the least. However, he cleared his throat again and began a description of that small but bitter section of his life's drama in which Cowperwood, finding himself in a tight place and about to fail, had come to him at his office and demanded that he loan him $300,000 more in one lump sum. There was considerable bickering just at this point between Steger and Shannon, for the former was very anxious to make it appear that Stenner was lying out of the whole cloth about this. Steger got in his objection at this point, and created a considerable diversion from the main theme, because Stenner kept saying he thought or he believed. "Object!" shouted Steger repeatedly. "I move that be stricken from the record as incompetent, irrelevant, and immaterial. The witness is not allowed to say what he thinks, and the prosecution knows it very well." "Your Honor," insisted Shannon, "I'm doing the best I can to have the witness tell a plain, straightforward story, and I think that it is obvious that he is doing so." "Object!" reiterated Steger vociferously. "Your Honor, I insist that the district attorney has no right to prejudice the minds of the jury by flattering estimates of the sincerity of the witness. What he thinks of the witness and his sincerity is of no importance in this case. I must ask that Your Honor caution him plainly in this matter." "Objection sustained," declared Judge Peterson. "The prosecution will please be more explicit." And Shannon went on with his case. Stenner's testimony, in one respect, was most important, for it made plain what Cowperwood did not want brought out, namely, that he and Stenner had had a dispute before this, that Stenner had distinctly told Cowperwood that he would not loan him any more money, that Cowperwood had told Stenner, on the day before he secured this check, and again on that very day, that he was in a very desperate situation financially, and that if he were not assisted to the extent of $300,000 he would fail, and that then both he and Stenner would be ruined. On the morning of this day, according to Stenner, he had sent Cowperwood a letter ordering him to cease purchasing city loan certificates for the sinking fund. It was after their conversation on the same afternoon that Cowperwood surreptitiously secured the check for $60,000 from Albert Stiers without his, Stenner's, knowledge, and it was subsequent to this letter again that Stenner, sending Albert to demand the return of the check, was refused, though the next day at 5 o'clock in the afternoon Cowperwood made an assignment. and the certificates for which the check had been purloined were not in the sinking fund as they should have been. This was dark testimony for Cowperwood. If anyone imagines that all this was done without many vehement objections and exceptions made and taken by Steger, and subsequently when he was cross-examining Stenner, by Shannon, he errs greatly. At times the chamber was coruscating with these two gentlemen's bitter wrangles, and His Honor was compelled to hammer his desk with his gavel, and to threaten both with contempt of court, in order to bring them to a sense of order. Indeed, while Paterson was highly incensed, the jury was amused and interested. "You gentlemen will have to stop this, or I tell you now that you will both be heavily fined. This is a court of law, not a bar-room. Mr. Steger, I expect you to apologize to me and your colleague at once. Mr. Shannon, I must ask that you use less aggressive methods. Your manner is offensive to me. It is not becoming to a court of law. I will not caution either of you again." Both lawyers apologized as lawyers do on such occasions, but it really made but little difference. Their individual attitudes and moods continued about as before. "What did he say to you?" asked Shannon of Stenner, after one of these troublesome interruptions, "on that occasion, October 9th last, when he came to you and demanded the loan of an additional $300,000? Give his words as near as you can remember, exactly if possible." "Object!" interposed Steger vigorously. "His exact words are not recorded anywhere except in Mr. Stenner's memory, and his memory of them cannot be admitted in this case. The witness has testified to the general facts." Judge Paterson smiled grimly. "Objection overruled," he returned. "Exception!" shouted Steger. "He said, as near as I can remember," replied Stenner, drumming on the arms of the witness chair in a nervous way, "that if I didn't give him $300,000 he was going to fail, and I would be poor and go to the penitentiary." "Object!" shouted Steger, leaping to his feet. "Your Honor, I object to the whole manner in which this examination is being conducted by the prosecution. The evidence which the district attorney is here trying to extract from the uncertain memory of the witness is in defiance of all law and precedent, and has no definite bearing on the facts of the case, and could not disprove or substantiate whether Mr. Cowperwood thought or did not think that he was going to fail. Mr. Stenner might give one version of this conversation, or any conversation that took place at this time, and Mr. Cowperwood another. As a matter of fact, their versions are different. I see no point in Mr. Shannon's line of inquiry, unless it is to prejudice the jury's minds towards accepting certain allegations which the prosecution is pleased to make and which it cannot possibly substantiate. I think you ought to caution the witness to testify only in regard to the things that he recalls exactly, not to what he thinks he remembers. And for my part, I think that all that has been testified to in the last 5 minutes might be well stricken out." "Objection overruled," replied Judge Paterson rather indifferently, and Steger, who had been talking merely to overcome the weight of Stenner's testimony in the minds of the jury, sat down. Shannon once more approached Stenner. "Now, as near as you can remember, Mr. Stenner, I wish you would tell the jury what else it was that Mr. Cowperwood said on that occasion. He certainly didn't stop with the remark that you would be ruined and go to the penitentiary. Wasn't there other language that was employed on that occasion?" "Well, he said, as far as I can remember," replied Stenner, "that there were a lot of political schemers who were trying to frighten me, that if I didn't give him $300,000 we would both be ruined, and that I might as well be tried for stealing a sheep as a lamb." "Ha!" yelled Shannon. "He said that, did he?" "Well, yes, sir, he did," said Stenner. "How did he say it exactly? What were his exact words?" Shannon demanded emphatically, pointing a forceful forefinger at Stenner in order to key him up to a clear memory of what had transpired. "Well, as near as I can remember, he said just that," replied Stenner vaguely. "You might as well be tried for stealing a sheep as a lamb." "Exactly!" exclaimed Shannon, whirling around past the jury to look at Cowperwood. "I thought so." "Pure pyrotechnics, Your Honor," said Steger, rising to his feet on the instant, "all intended to prejudice the minds of the jury. Acting. I wish you would caution the counsel for the prosecution to confine himself to the evidence in hand, and not act for the benefit of his case." The spectators smiled, and Judge Paterson, noting it, frowned severely. "Do you make that as an objection, Mr. Steger?" he asked. "I certainly do, Your Honor," insisted Steger resourcefully. "Objection overruled. Neither counsel for the prosecution nor for the defense is limited to a peculiar routine of expression." Steger himself was ready to smile, but he did not dare to. Cowperwood, fearing the force of such testimony and regretting it, still looked at Stenner pityingly. The feebleness of the man, the weakness of the man, the pass to which his cowardice had brought them both. When Shannon was through bringing out this unsatisfactory data, Steger took Stenner in hand, but he could not make as much out of him as he hoped. Insofar as this particular situation was concerned, Stenner was telling the exact truth, and it is hard to weaken the effect of the exact truth by any subtlety of interpretation, though it can sometimes be done. With painstaking care, Steger went over all the ground of Stenner's long relationship with Cowperwood, and tried to make it appear that Cowperwood was invariably the disinterested agent, not the ringleader in a subtle, really criminal adventure. It was hard to do, but he made a fine impression. Still, the jury listened with skeptical minds. It might not be fair to punish Cowperwood for seizing with avidity upon a splendid chance to get rich quick, they thought, but it certainly was not worthwhile to throw a veil of innocence over such palpable human cupidity. Finally, both lawyers were through with Stenner for the time being anyhow, and then Albert Stiers was called to the stand. He was the same thin, pleasant, alert, rather agreeable soul that he had been in the heyday of his clerkly prosperity. A little paler now, but not otherwise changed. His small property had been saved for him by Cowperwood, who had advised Steger to inform the Municipal Reform Association that Stiers' bondsmen were attempting to sequestrate it for their own benefit, when actually it should go to the city, if there were any real claim against him, which there was not. That watchful organization had issued one of its numerous reports covering this point, and Albert had had the pleasure of seeing Strobick and the others withdraw in haste. Naturally, he was grateful to Cowperwood, even though once he had been compelled to cry in vain in his presence. He was anxious now to do anything he could to help the banker, but his naturally truthful disposition prevented him from telling anything except the plain facts, which were partly beneficial and partly not. Stiers testified that he recalled Cowperwood saying that he had purchased the certificates, that he was entitled to the money, that Stenner was unduly frightened, and that no harm would come to him, Albert. He identified certain memoranda in the city treasurer's books, which were produced as being accurate, and others in Cowperwood's books, which were also produced as being corroborative. His testimony as to Stenner's astonishment on discovering that his chief clerk had given Cowperwood a check was against the latter, but Cowperwood hoped to overcome the effect of this by his own testimony later. Up to now, both Steger and Cowperwood felt that they were doing fairly well, and that they need not be surprised if they won their case. Chapter 42. The trial moved on. One witness for the prosecution after another followed until the state had built up an arraignment that satisfied Shannon that he had established Cowperwood's guilt, whereupon he announced that he rested. Steger at once arose and began a long argument for the dismissal of the case on the ground that there was no evidence to show this, that, and the other, but Judge Peterson would have none of it. He knew how important the matter was in the local political world. "I don't think you had better go into all that now, Mr. Steger," he said wearily, after allowing him to proceed a reasonable distance. "I am familiar with the custom of the city, and the indictment as here made does not concern the custom of the city. Your argument is with the jury, not with me. I couldn't enter into that now. You may renew your motion at the close of the defendant's case." Motion denied. District Attorney Shannon, who had been listening attentively, sat down. Steger, seeing there was no chance to soften the judge's mind by any subtlety of argument, returned to Cowperwood, who smiled at the result. "We'll just have to take our chances with the jury," he announced. "I was sure of it," replied Cowperwood. Steger then approached the jury, and having outlined the case briefly from his angle of observation, continued by telling them what he was sure the evidence would show from his point of view. "As a matter of fact, gentlemen, there is no essential difference in the evidence which the prosecution can present and that which we, the defense, can present. We are not going to dispute that Mr. Cowperwood received a check from Mr. Stenner for $60,000, or that he failed to put the certificate of city loan, which that sum of money represented, and to which he was entitled in payment as agent, in the sinking fund, as the prosecution now claims he should have done. But we are going to claim and prove also beyond the shadow of a reasonable doubt that he had a right, as the agent of the city, doing business with the city through its Treasury Department for 4 years, to withhold, under an agreement which he had with the city treasurer, all payments of money and all deposits of certificates in the sinking fund until the first day of each succeeding month, the first month following any given transaction. As a matter of fact, we can and will bring many traders and bankers who have had dealings with the city treasury in the past in just this way to prove this, The prosecution is going to ask you to believe that Mr. Cowperwood knew at the time he received this check that he was going to fail, that he did not buy the certificates, as he claimed, with the view of placing them in the sinking fund, and that, knowing that he was going to fail, and that he could not subsequently deposit them, he deliberately went to Mr. Albert Stiers, Mr. Stener's secretary, told him that he had purchased such certificates, and on the strength of a falsehood, implied if not actually spoken, secured the check and walked away. Now, gentlemen, I am not going to enter into a long-winded discussion of these points at this time, since the testimony is going to show very rapidly what the facts are. We have a number of witnesses here, and we are all anxious to have them heard. What I am going to ask you to remember is that there is not one scintilla of testimony outside of that which may possibly be given by Mr. George W. Stener, which will show either that Mr. Cowperwood knew, at the time he called on the city treasurer, that he was going to fail, or that he had not purchased the certificates in question, or that he had not the right to withhold them from the sinking fund as long as he pleased up to the 1st of the month, the time he invariably struck a balance with the city. Mr. Stener, the ex-city treasurer, may possibly testify one way. Mr. Cowperwood, on his own behalf, will testify another. It will then be for you gentlemen to decide between them, to decide which one you prefer to believe. Mr. George W. Stener, the ex-city treasurer, the former commercial associate of Mr. Cowperwood, who, after years and years of profit, solely because of conditions of financial stress, fire, and panic, preferred to turn on his one-time associate, from whose labors he had reaped so much profit, or Mr. Frank A. Cowperwood, the well-known banker and financier, who did his best to weather the storm alone, who fulfilled to the letter every agreement he ever had with the city, who has even until this hour been busy trying to remedy the unfair financial difficulties forced upon him by fire and panic, and who only yesterday made an offer to the city that, if he were allowed to continue in uninterrupted control of his affairs, he would gladly repay as quickly as possible every dollar of his indebtedness, which is really not all his, including the $500,000 under discussion between him and Mr. Stener and the city, and so prove by his works, not talk, that there was no basis for this unfair suspicion of his motives. As you perhaps surmise, the city has not chosen to accept his offer, and I shall try and tell you why later, gentlemen. For the present we will proceed with the testimony, and for the defense all I ask is that you give very close attention to all that is testified to here today. Listen very carefully to Mr. W.C. Davison when he is put on the stand. Listen equally carefully to Mr. Cowperwood when we call him to testify. Follow the other testimony closely, and then you will be able to judge for yourselves. See if you can distinguish a just motive for this prosecution. I can't. I am very much obliged to you for listening to me, gentlemen, so attentively. He then put on Arthur Rivers, who had acted for Cowperwood on 'change as special agent during the panic, to testify to the large quantities of city loan he had purchased to stay the market. And then, after him, Cowperwood's brothers, Edward and Joseph, who testified to instructions received from Rivers as to buying and selling city loans on that occasion, principally buying. The next witness was President W.C. Davison of the Girard National Bank. He was a large man physically, not so round of body as full and broad. His shoulders and chest were ample. He had a big blond head, with an ample breadth of forehead, which was high and sane-looking. He had a thick, squat nose, which, however, was forceful, and thin, firm, even lips. There was the faintest touch of cynical humor in his hard blue eyes at times, but mostly he was friendly, alert, placid-looking, without seeming in the least sentimental or even kindly. His business, as one could see plainly, was to insist on hard financial facts, and one could see also how he would naturally be drawn to Frank Algernon Cowperwood without being mentally dominated or upset by him. As he took the chair very quietly, and yet one might say significantly, it was obvious that he felt that this sort of legal financial palaver was above the average man and beneath the dignity of a true financier. In other words, a bother. The drowsy spark-heaver, holding up a Bible beside him for him to swear by, might as well have been a block of wood. His oath was a personal matter with him. It was good business to tell the truth at times. His testimony was very direct and very simple. He had known Mr. Frank Algernon Cowperwood for nearly 10 years. He had done business with or through him nearly all of that time. He knew nothing of his personal relations with Mr. Stener, and did not know Mr. Stener personally. As for the particular check of $60,000, yes, he had seen it before. It had come into the bank on October 10th, along with other collateral, to offset an overdraft on the part of Cowperwood and Company. It was placed to the credit of Cowperwood Company on the books of the bank, and the bank secured the cash through the clearinghouse. No money was drawn out of the bank by Cowperwood Company after that to create an overdraft. The bank's account with Cowperwood was squared. Nevertheless, Mr. Cowperwood might have drawn heavily, and nothing would have been thought of it. Mr. Davison did not know that Mr. Cowperwood was going to fail, did not suppose that he could so quickly. He had frequently overdrawn his account with the bank. As a matter of fact, it was the regular course of his business to overdraw it. It kept his assets actively in use, which was the height of good business. His overdrafts were protected by collateral, however, and it was his custom to send bundles of collateral or checks, or both, which were variously distributed to keep things straight. Mr. Cowperwood's account was the largest and most active in the bank, Mr. Davison kindly volunteered. When Mr. Cowperwood had failed, there had been over $90,000 worth of certificates of city loan in the bank's possession, which Mr. Cowperwood had sent there as collateral. Shannon, on cross-examination, tried to find out for the sake of the effect on the jury whether Mr. Davison was not for some ulterior motive especially favorable to Cowperwood. It was not possible for him to do that. Steger followed, and did his best to render the favorable points made by Mr. Davison in Cowperwood's behalf perfectly clear to the jury by having him repeat them. Shannon objected, of course, but it was of no use. Steger managed to make his point. He now decided to have Cowperwood take the stand, and at the mention of his name in this connection the whole courtroom bristled. Cowperwood came forward briskly and quickly. He was so calm, so jaunty, so defiant of life, and yet so courteous to it. These lawyers, this jury, this straw-and-water judge, these machinations of fate, did not basically disturb or humble or weaken him. He saw through the mental equipment of the jury at once. He wanted to assist his counsel in disturbing and confusing Shannon, but his reason told him that only an indestructible fabric of fact or seeming would do it. He believed in the financial rightness of the thing he had done. He was entitled to do it. Life was war, particularly financial life, and strategy was its keynote, its duty, its necessity. Why should he bother about petty, picayune minds which would not understand this? He went over his history for Steger and the jury. He put the sanest, most comfortable light on it that he could. He had not gone to Mr. Stenner in the first place, he said. He had been called. He had not urged Mr. Stenner to anything. He had merely shown him and his friends financial possibilities, which they were only too eager to seize upon. And they had seized upon them. It was not possible for Shannon to discover at this period how subtly he had organized his streetcar companies, so that he could have shaken out Stenner and his friends without their being able to voice a single protest. So he talked of these things as opportunities, which he had made for Stenner and others. Shannon was not a financier, neither was Steger. They had to believe in a way, though they doubted it, partly, particularly Shannon. He was not responsible for the custom prevailing in the office of the city treasurer, he said. He was a banker and broker. The jury looked at him, and believed all except this matter of the $60,000 check. When it came to that, he explained it all plausibly enough. When he had gone to see Stenner those several last days, he had not fancied that he was really going to fail. He had asked Stenner for some money, it is true. Not so very much, all things considered, $150,000. But as Stenner should have testified, he, Cowperwood, was not disturbed in his manner. Stenner had merely been one resource of his. He was satisfied at that time that he had many others. He had not used the forceful language or made the urgent appeal which Stenner said he had, although he had pointed out to Stenner that it was a mistake to become panic-stricken, also to withhold further credit. It was true that Stenner was his easiest, his quickest resource, but not his only one. He thought, as a matter of fact, that his credit would be greatly extended by his principal money friends, if necessary, and that he would have ample time to patch up his affairs and keep things going until the storm should blow over. He had told Stenner of his extended purchase of city loan to stay the market on the first day of the panic, and of the fact that $60,000 was due him. Stenner had made no objection. It was just possible that he was too mentally disturbed at the time to pay close attention. After that, to his, Cowperwood's surprise, unexpected pressure on great financial houses from unexpected directions had caused them to be not willingly but unfortunately severe with him. This pressure, coming collectively the next day, had compelled him to close his doors, though he had not really expected to up to the last moment. His call for the $60,000 check at the time had been purely fortuitous. He needed the money, of course, but it was due him, and his clerks were all very busy. He merely asked for and took it personally to save time. Stenner knew if it had been refused him, he would have brought suit. The matter of depositing city loan certificates in the sinking fund, when purchased for the city, was something to which he never gave any personal attention whatsoever. His bookkeeper, Mr. Stapley, attended to all that. He did not know, as a matter of fact, that they had not been deposited. This was a barefaced lie, he did know. As for the check being turned over to the Girard National Bank, that was fortuitous. It might just as well have been turned over to some other bank if the conditions had been different. Thus on and on he went, answering all of Steger's and Shannon's searching questions with the most engaging frankness, and you could have sworn from the solemnity with which he took it all, the serious business attention, that he was the soul of so-called commercial honor. And to say truly, he did believe in the justice as well as the necessity and the importance of all that he had done and now described. He wanted the jury to see it as he saw it, put itself in his place, and sympathize with him. He was through, finally, and the effect on the jury of his testimony and his personality was peculiar. Philip Moultrie, juror number 1, decided that Cowperwood was lying. He could not see how it was possible that he could not know the day before that he was going to fail. He must have known, he thought. Anyhow, the whole series of transactions between him and Stenner seemed deserving of some punishment, and all during this testimony he was thinking how, when he got in the jury room, he would vote guilty. He even thought of some of the arguments he would use to convince the others that Cowperwood was guilty. Juror number 2, on the contrary, Simon Glassberg, a clothier, thought he understood how it all came about, and decided to vote for acquittal. He did not think Cowperwood was innocent, but he did not think he deserved to be punished. Juror number 3, Fletcher Norton, an architect, thought Cowperwood was guilty, but at the same time that he was too talented to be sent to prison. Juror number 4, Charles Hilligan, an Irishman, a contractor, and a somewhat religious-minded person, thought Cowperwood was guilty and ought to be punished. Juror number 5, Philip Lukesh, a coal merchant, thought he was guilty. Juror number 6, Benjamin Fraser, a mining expert, thought he was probably guilty, but he could not be sure. Uncertain what he would do, juror number 7, J. Bridges, a broker in 3rd Street, small, practical, narrow, thought Cowperwood was shrewd and guilty and deserved to be punished. He would vote for his punishment. Juror number 8, Guy E. Tripp, general manager of a small steamboat company, was uncertain. Juror number 9, Joseph Tisdale, a retired glue manufacturer, thought Cowperwood was probably guilty as charged, but to Tisdale it was no crime. Cowperwood was entitled to do as he had done under the circumstances. Tisdale would vote for his acquittal. Juror number 10, Richard Marsh, a young florist, was for Cowperwood in a sentimental way. He had, as a matter of fact, no real convictions. Juror number 11, Richard Weber, a grocer, small financially, but heavy physically, was for Cowperwood's conviction. He thought him guilty. Juror number 12, Washington B. Thomas, a wholesale flour merchant, thought Cowperwood was guilty, but believed in a recommendation to mercy after pronouncing him so. Men ought to be reformed, was his slogan. So they stood, and so Cowperwood left them, wondering whether any of his testimony had had a favorable effect. Chapter 43. Since it is the privilege of the lawyer for the defense to address the jury first, Steger bowed politely to his colleague and came forward. Putting his hands on the jury box rail, he began in a very quiet, modest, but impressive way. Gentlemen of the jury, my client, Mr. Frank Algernon Cowperwood, a well-known banker and financier of this city, doing business in 3rd Street, is charged by the state of Pennsylvania, represented by the district attorney of this district, with fraudulently transferring from the treasury of the city of Philadelphia to his own purse the sum of $60,000 in the form of a check made out to his order, dated October 9, 1871, and by him received from one Albert Stiers, the private secretary and head bookkeeper of the treasurer of this city, at the time in question. Now, gentlemen, what are the facts in this connection? You have heard the various witnesses and know the general outlines of the story. Take the testimony of George W. Stenner to begin with. He tells you that sometime back in the year 1866 he was greatly in need of some banker or broker, who would tell him how to bring city loan, which was selling very low at the time, to par, who would not only tell him this, but proceed to demonstrate that his knowledge was accurate by doing it. Mr. Stenner was an inexperienced man at the time in the matter of finance. Mr. Cowperwood was an active young man with an enviable record as a broker and a trader on 'change. He proceeded to demonstrate to Mr. Stenner, not only in theory but in fact, how this thing of bringing city loan to par could be done. He made an arrangement at that time with Mr. Stenner, the details of which you have heard from Mr. Stenner himself, the result of which was that a large amount of city loan was turned over to Mr. Cowperwood by Mr. Stenner for sale, and by adroit manipulation, methods of buying and selling which need not be gone into here, but which are perfectly sane and legitimate in the world in which Mr. Cowperwood operated, did bring that loan to par, and kept it there year after year, as you have all heard here testified to. Now, what is the bone of contention here, gentlemen? The significant fact which brings Mr. Stenner into this court at this time, charging his old-time agent and broker with larceny and embezzlement, and alleging that he has transferred to his own use, without a shadow of return, $60,000 of the money which belongs to the city treasury. What is it? Is it that Mr. Cowperwood secretly, with great stealth, as it were, at some time or other, unknown to Mr. Stenner or to his assistants, entered the office of the treasurer and forcibly, and with criminal intent, carried away $60,000 worth of the city's money? Not at all. The charge is, as you have heard the district attorney explain, that Mr. Cowperwood came in broad daylight at between 4 and 5 o'clock of the afternoon preceding the day of his assignment, was closeted with Mr. Stenner for a half or three-quarters of an hour, came out, explained to Mr. Albert Stiers that he had recently bought $60,000 worth of city loan from the city's sinking fund, for which he had not been paid, asked that the amount be credited on the city's books to him, and that he be given a check, which was his due, and walked out. Anything very remarkable about that, gentlemen? Anything very strange? Has it been testified here today that Mr. Cowperwood was not the agent of the city for the transaction of just such business as he said on that occasion that he had transacted? Did anyone say here on the witness stand that he had not bought city loan as he said he had? Why is it, then, that Mr. Stenner charges Mr. Cowperwood with larcenously securing and feloniously disposing of a check for $60,000 for certificates, which he had a right to buy, and which it has not been contested here that he did buy? The reason lies just here. Listen, just here. At the time my client asked for the check and took it away with him, and deposited it in his own bank to his own account, he failed, so the prosecution insists, to put the $60,000 worth of certificates for which he had received the check in the sinking fund. And having failed to do that, and being compelled by the pressure of financial events the same day to suspend payment generally, he thereby, according to the prosecution and the anxious leaders of the Republican Party in the city, became an embezzler, a thief, a this or that, anything you please, so long as you find a substitute for George W. Stenner and the indifferent leaders of the Republican Party in the eyes of the people.
And here Mr. Steger proceeded boldly and defiantly to outline the entire political situation as it had manifested itself in connection with the Chicago fire, the subsequent panic and its political consequences, and to picture Cowperwood as the unjustly maligned agent, who before the fire was valuable and honorable enough to suit any of the political leaders of Philadelphia, but afterward, and when political defeat threatened, was picked upon as the most available scapegoat anywhere within reach. And it took him a half-hour to do that, and afterward, but only after he had pointed to Stenner as the true henchman and stalking horse who had, in turn, been used by political forces above him to accomplish certain financial results, which they were not willing to have ascribed to themselves, he continued with, "But now, in the light of all this, only see how ridiculous all this is, how silly. Frank A. Cowperwood had always been the agent of the city in these matters for years and years. He worked under certain rules which he and Mr. Stenner had agreed upon in the first place, and which obviously came from others who were above Mr. Stenner, since they were holdover customs and rules from administrations, which had been long before Mr. Stenner ever appeared on the scene as city treasurer. One of them was that he could carry all transactions over until the first of the month following before he struck a balance. That is, he need not pay any money over for anything to the city treasurer, need not send him any checks or deposit any money or certificates in the sinking fund until the first of the month, because, now listen to this carefully, gentlemen, it is important, because his transactions in connection with city loan and everything else that he dealt in for the city treasurer were so numerous, so swift, so uncalculated beforehand, that he had to have a loose, easy system of this kind in order to do his work properly, to do business at all. Otherwise, he could not very well have worked to the best advantage for Mr. Stenner, or for anyone else. It would have meant too much bookkeeping for him, too much for the city treasurer. Mr. Stenner has testified to that in the early part of his story. Albert Stiers has indicated that that was his understanding of it. Well, then what? Why, just this.
Would any jury suppose, would any sane businessman believe that if such were the case, Mr. Cowperwood would be running personally with all these items of deposit, to the different banks, or the sinking fund, or the city treasurer's office, or would be saying to his head bookkeeper, "Here, Stapley, here is a check for $60,000. See that the certificates of loan, which this represents, are put in the sinking fund today? And why not?" What a ridiculous supposition. Any other supposition is. As a matter of course, and has always been the case, Mr. Cowperwood had a system. When the time came, this check and these certificates would be automatically taken care of. He handed his bookkeeper the check and forgot all about it. Would you imagine a banker with a vast business of this kind doing anything else? Mr. Steger paused for breath and inquiry, and then, having satisfied himself that his point had been sufficiently made, he continued. Of course the answer is that he knew he was going to fail. Well, Mr. Cowperwood's reply is that he didn't know anything of the sort. He has personally testified here that it was only at the last moment before it actually happened that he either thought or knew of such an occurrence. Why, then, this alleged refusal to let him have the check to which he was legally entitled? I think I know. I think I can give a reason if you will hear me out. Steger shifted his position and came at the jury from another intellectual angle. It was simply because Mr. George W. Stenner, at that time, owing to a recent notable fire and a panic, imagined for some reason, perhaps because Mr. Cowperwood cautioned him not to become frightened over local developments generally, that Mr. Cowperwood was going to close his doors. And having considerable money on deposit with him at a low rate of interest, Mr. Stenner decided that Mr. Cowperwood must not have any more money, not even the money that was actually due him for services rendered, and that had nothing whatsoever to do with the money loaned him by Mr. Stenner at 2.5%. Now, isn't that a ridiculous situation? But it was because Mr. George W. Stenner was filled with his own fears, based on a fire and a panic which had obviously nothing to do with Mr. Cowperwood's solvency in the beginning, that he decided not to let Frank A. Cowperwood have the money that was actually due him, because he, Stenner, was criminally using the city's money to further his own private interests, through Mr. Cowperwood as a broker, and in danger of being exposed and possibly punished. Now, where, I ask you, does the good sense of that decision come in? Is it apparent to you, gentlemen? Was Mr. Cowperwood still an agent for the city at the time he bought the loan certificates, as here testified? He certainly was. If so, was he entitled to that money? Who is going to stand up here and deny it? Where is the question, then, as to his right or his honesty in this matter? How does it come in here at all? I can tell you, it sprang solely from one source and from nowhere else, and that is the desire of the politicians of this city to find a scapegoat for the Republican Party. Now, you may think I'm going rather far afield for an explanation of this very peculiar decision to prosecute Mr. Cowperwood, an agent of the city, for demanding and receiving what actually belonged to him, but I'm not. Consider the position of the Republican Party at that time. Consider the fact that an exposure of the truth in regard to the details of a large defalcation of the city treasury would have a very unsatisfactory effect on the election about to be held. The Republican Party had a new city treasurer to elect, a new district attorney. It had been in the habit of allowing its city treasurers the privilege of investing the funds in their possession at a low rate of interest for the benefit of themselves and their friends. Their salaries were small. They had to have some way of eking out a reasonable existence. Was Mr. George Stenner responsible for this custom of loaning out the city money? Not at all. Was Mr. Cowperwood? Not at all. The custom had been in vogue long before either Mr. Cowperwood or Mr. Stenner came on the scene. Why, then, this great hue and cry about it now? The entire uproar sprang solely from the fear of Mr. Stenner at this juncture, the fear of the politicians at this juncture, of public exposé. No city treasurer had ever been exposed before. It was a new thing to face exposure, to face the risk of having the public's attention called to a rather nefarious practice, of which Mr. Stenner was taking advantage. That was all. A great fire and a panic were endangering the security and well-being of many a financial organization in the city, Mr. Cowperwood's among others. It meant many possible failures, and many possible failures meant one possible failure. If Frank A. Cowperwood failed, he would fail owing the city of Philadelphia $500,000, borrowed from the city treasurer at the very low rate of interest of 2.5%. Anything very detrimental to Mr. Cowperwood in that? Had he gone to the city treasurer and asked to be loaned money at 2.5%? If he had, was there anything criminal in it from a business point of view? Isn't a man entitled to borrow money from any source he can at the lowest possible rate of interest? Did Mr. Stenner have to loan it to Mr. Cowperwood if he did not want to? As a matter of fact, didn't he testify here today that he personally had sent for Mr. Cowperwood in the first place? Why then, in heaven's name, this excited charge of larceny, larceny as Bailey, embezzlement, embezzlement on a check, etc., etc.? Once more, gentlemen, listen. I'll tell you why. The men who stood behind Stenner, and whose bidding he was doing, wanted to make a political scapegoat of someone, of Frank Algernon Cowperwood, if they couldn't get anyone else. That's why. No other reason under God's blue sky, not one. Why, if Mr. Cowperwood needed more money just at that time to tide him over, it would have been good policy for them to have given it to him and hushed this matter up. It would have been illegal, though not any more illegal than anything else that has ever been done in this connection, but it would have been safer. Fear, gentlemen, fear, lack of courage, inability to meet a great crisis when a great crisis appears, was all that really prevented them from doing this. They were afraid to place confidence in a man who had never heretofore betrayed their trust, and from whose loyalty and great financial ability they and the city had been reaping large profits. The reigning city treasurer of the time didn't have the courage to go on in the face of fire and panic and the rumors of possible failure and stick by his illegal guns, and so he decided to draw in his horns, as testified here today, to ask Mr. Cowperwood to return all, or at least a big part, of the $500,000 he had loaned him, and which Cowperwood had been actually using for his, Stenner's, benefit, and to refuse him in addition the money that was actually due him for an authorized purchase of city loan. Was Cowperwood guilty as an agent in any of these transactions? Not in the least. Was there any suit pending to make him return the $500,000 of city money involved in his present failure? Not at all. It was simply a case of wild, silly panic on the part of George W. Stenner, and a strong desire on the part of the Republican Party leaders, once they discovered what the situation was, to find someone outside of Stenner, the party treasurer, upon whom they could blame the shortage in the Treasury. You heard what Mr. Cowperwood testified to here in this case today, that he went to Mr. Stenner to forefend against any possible action of this kind in the first place. And it was because of this very warning that Mr. Stenner became wildly excited, lost his head, and wanted Mr. Cowperwood to return him all his money. All the $500,000 he had loaned him at 2.5%. Isn't that silly financial business at the best? Wasn't that a fine time to try to call a perfectly legal loan? But now to return to this particular check of $60,000. When Mr. Cowperwood called that last afternoon before he failed, Mr. Stenner testified that he told him that he couldn't have any more money, that it was impossible, and that then Mr. Cowperwood went out into his general office and without his knowledge or consent persuaded his chief clerk and secretary, Mr. Albert Stiers, to give him a check for $60,000 to which he was not entitled and on which he, Stenner, would have stopped payment if he had known. What nonsense! Why didn't he know? The books were there, open to him. Mr. Stiers told him the first thing the next morning. Mr. Cowperwood thought nothing of it, for he was entitled to it, and could collect it in any court of law having jurisdiction in such cases, failure or no failure. It is silly for Mr. Stenner to say he would have stopped payment. Such a claim was probably an afterthought of the next morning, after he had talked with his friends, the politicians, and was all a part, a trick, a trap to provide the Republican Party with a scapegoat at this time. Nothing more and nothing less, and you may be sure no one knew it better than the people who were most anxious to see Mr. Cowperwood convicted.
Steger paused and looked significantly at Shannon.
Gentlemen of the jury, he finally concluded quietly and earnestly, you are going to find, when you think it over in the jury room this evening, that this charge of larceny, and larceny as Bailey, and embezzlement of a check of $60,000, which are contained in this indictment, and which represent nothing more than the eager effort of the district attorney to word this one act in such a way that it will look like a crime, represents nothing more than the excited imagination of a lot of political refugees who are anxious to protect their own skirts at the expense of Mr. Cowperwood, and who care for nothing, honor, fair play, or anything else, so long as they are let off scot-free. They don't want the Republicans of Pennsylvania to think too ill of the Republican Party management and control in this city. They want to protect George W. Stenner as much as possible, and to make a political scapegoat of my client. It can't be done, and it won't be done. As honorable, intelligent men, you won't permit it to be done, and I think with that thought I can safely leave you.
Steger suddenly turned from the jury box and walked to his seat beside Cowperwood, while Shannon arose, calm, forceful, vigorous, much younger. As between man and man, Shannon was not particularly opposed to the case Steger had made out of Cowperwood, nor was he opposed to Cowperwood's having made money as he did. As a matter of fact, Shannon actually thought that if he had been in Cowperwood's position, he would have done exactly the same thing. However, he was the newly elected district attorney. He had a record to make. And besides, the political powers who were above him were satisfied that Cowperwood ought to be convicted for the looks of the thing. Therefore he laid his hands firmly on the rail at first, looked the jurors steadily in the eyes for a time, and, having framed a few thoughts in his mind, began. "Now, gentlemen of the jury, it seems to me that if we all pay strict attention to what has transpired here today, we will have no difficulty in reaching a conclusion, and it will be a very satisfactory one if we all try to interpret the facts correctly. This defendant, Mr. Cowperwood, comes into this court today charged, as I have stated to you before, with larceny as bailey, with embezzlement, and with embezzlement on a specific check, namely one dated October 9, 1871, drawn to the order of Frank A. Cowperwood & Company, for the sum of $60,000 by the Secretary of the City Treasurer for the City Treasurer, and by him signed, as he had a perfect right to sign it, and delivered to the said Frank A. Cowperwood, who claims that he was not only properly solvent at the time, but had previously purchased certificates of city loan to the value of $60,000, and had at that time, or would shortly thereafter, as was his custom, deposit them to the credit of the city in the city's sinking fund, and thus close what would ordinarily be an ordinary transaction, namely, that of Frank A. Cowperwood & Company as bankers and brokers for the city buying city loan for the city, depositing it in the sinking fund, and being promptly and properly reimbursed. Now, gentlemen, what are the actual facts in this case? Was the said Frank A. Cowperwood & Company, there is no company, as you well know, as you have heard testified here today, only Frank A. Cowperwood, was the said Frank A. Cowperwood a fit person to receive the check at this time in the manner he received it? That is, was he authorized agent of the city at the time, or was he not? Was he solvent? Did he actually himself think he was going to fail, and was this $60,000 check a last thin straw which he was grabbing at to save his financial life, regardless of what it involved legally, morally, or otherwise? Or had he actually purchased certificates of city loan to the amount he said he had, in the way he said he had, at the time he said he had, and was he merely collecting his honest due? Did he intend to deposit these certificates of loans in the city's sinking fund, as he said he would, as it was understood naturally and normally that he would, or did he not? Were his relations with the city treasurer as broker and agent the same as they had always been on the day that he secured this particular check for $60,000, or were they not? Had they been terminated by a conversation 15 minutes before, or 2 days before, or 2 weeks before? It makes no difference when, so long as they had been properly terminated, or had they not? A businessman has a right to abrogate an agreement at any time where there is no specific form of contract, and no fixed period of operation entered into, as you all must know. You must not forget that in considering the evidence in this case, did George W. Stenner, knowing or suspecting that Frank A. Cowperwood was in a tight place financially, unable to fulfill any longer properly and honestly the duties supposedly devolving on him by this agreement, terminate it then and there on October 9, 1871, before this check for $60,000 was given, or did he not? Did Mr. Frank A. Cowperwood then and there, knowing that he was no longer an agent of the city treasurer and the city, and knowing also that he was insolvent, having, as Mr. Stenner contends, admitted to him that he was so, and having no intention of placing the certificates which he subsequently declared he had purchased in the sinking fund, go out into Mr. Stenner's general office, meet his secretary, tell him he had purchased $60,000 worth of city loan, ask for the check, get it, put it in his pocket, walk off, and never make any return of any kind in any matter, shape, or form to the city, and then subsequently, 24 hours later, fail, owing this and $500,000 more to the city treasury, or did he not? What are the facts in this case? What have the witnesses testified to? What has George W. Stenner testified to, Albert Stiers, President Davison, Mr. Cowperwood himself? What are the interesting, subtle facts in this case, anyhow? Gentlemen, you have a very curious problem to decide. He paused and gazed at the jury, adjusting his sleeves as he did so, and looking as though he knew for certain that he was on the trail of a slippery, elusive criminal, who was in a fair way to foist himself upon an honorable and decent community, and an honorable and innocent jury as an honest man. Then he continued. Now, gentlemen, what are the facts? You can see for yourselves exactly how this whole situation has come about. You are sensible men. I don't need to tell you. Here are two men, one elected treasurer of the city of Philadelphia, sworn to guard the interests of the city and to manipulate its finances to the best advantage, and the other called in at the time of uncertain financial cogitation to assist in unraveling a possibly difficult financial problem. And then you have a case of a quiet, private financial understanding being reached, and of subsequent illegal dealings in which one man who is shrewder, wiser, more versed in the subtle ways of Third Street, leads the other along over seemingly charming paths of fortunate investment into an accidental but nonetheless criminal mire of failure and exposure and public calumny and whatnot. And then they get to the place where the more vulnerable individual of the two, the man in the most dangerous position, the city treasurer of Philadelphia, no less, can no longer reasonably or, let us say, courageously follow the other fellow. And then you have such a spectacle as was described here this afternoon in the witness chair by Mr. Stenner. That is, you have a vicious, greedy, unmerciful financial wolf standing over a cowering, unsophisticated commercial lamb and saying to him, his white, shiny teeth glittering all the while, "If you don't advance me the money I ask for, the $300,000 I now demand, you will be a convict. Your children will be thrown in the street. You and your wife and your family will be in poverty again, and there will be no one to turn a hand for you." That is what Mr. Stenner says Mr. Cowperwood said to him. I, for my part, haven't a doubt in the world that he did. Mr. Steger, in his very guarded references to his client, describes him as a nice, kind, gentlemanly agent, a broker merely on whom was practically forced the use of $500,000 at 2.5%, when money was bringing from 10 to 15% in Third Street on call loans and even more. But I, for one, can't choose to believe it. The thing that strikes me as strange in all of this is that if he was so nice and kind and gentle and remote, a mere hired and therefore subservient agent, how is it that he could have gone to Mr. Stenner's office 2 or 3 days before the matter of this $60,000 check came up, and say to him, as Mr. Stenner testifies under oath that he did say to him, "If you don't give me $300,000 worth more of the city's money at once, today, I will fail, and you will be a convict. You will go to the penitentiary." That's what he said to him. "I will fail, and you will be a convict. They can't touch me, but they will arrest you. I am an agent merely." Does that sound like a nice, mild, innocent, well-mannered agent, a hired broker? Or doesn't it sound like a hard, defiant, contemptuous master, a man in control and ready to rule and win by fair means or foul? Gentlemen, I hold no brief for George W. Stenner. In my judgment, he is as guilty as his smug co-partner in crime, if not more so, this oily financier who came smiling and in sheep's clothing, pointing out subtle ways by which the city's money could be made profitable for both. But when I hear Mr. Cowperwood described as I have just heard him described, as a nice, mild, innocent agent, my gorge rises. Why, gentlemen, if you want to get a right point of view on this whole proposition, you will have to go back about 10 or 12 years and see Mr. George W. Stenner as he was then, a rather poverty-stricken beginner in politics, and before this very subtle and capable broker and agent came along and pointed out ways and means by which the city's money could be made profitable. George W. Stenner wasn't very much of a personage then, and neither was Frank A. Cowperwood when he found Stenner newly elected to the office of city treasurer. Can't you see him arriving at this time, nice and fresh and young and well-dressed, as shrewd as a fox, and saying, "Come to me. Let me handle city loan. Loan me the city's money at 2% or less." Can't you hear him suggesting this? Can't you see him? George W. Stenner was a poor man, comparatively a very poor man, when he first became city treasurer. All he had was a small real estate and insurance business, which brought him in, say, $2,500 a year. He had a wife and 4 children to support, and he had never had the slightest taste of what for him might be called luxury or comfort. Then comes Mr. Cowperwood, at his request, to be sure, but on an errand which held no theory of evil gains in Mr. Stenner's mind at the time, and proposes his grand scheme of manipulating all the city loan to their mutual advantage. Do you yourselves think, gentlemen, from what you have seen of George W. Stenner here on the witness stand, that it was he who proposed this plan of ill-gotten wealth to that gentleman over there? He pointed to Cowperwood. Does he look to you like a man who would be able to tell that gentleman anything about finance or this wonderful manipulation that followed? I ask you, does he look clever enough to suggest all the subtleties by which these two subsequently made so much money?
Why, the statement of this man Cowperwood made to his creditors at the time of his failure here a few weeks ago showed that he considered himself to be worth over $1,250,000, and he is only a little over 34 years old today. How much was he worth at the time he first entered business relations with the ex-city treasurer? Have you any idea? I can tell. I had the matter looked up almost a month ago on my accession to office. Just a little over $200,000, gentlemen. Just a little over $200,000. Here is an abstract from the files of Dunn & Company for that year. Now you can see how rapidly our Caesar has grown in wealth since then. You can see how profitable these few short years have been to him. Was George W. Stenner worth any such sum at the time he was removed from his office and indicted for embezzlement? Was he? I have here a schedule of his liabilities and assets made out at the time. You can see it for yourselves, gentlemen. Just $220,000 measured the sum of all his property 3 weeks ago, and it is an accurate estimate, as I have reason to know. Why was it, do you suppose, that Mr. Cowperwood grew so fast in wealth and Mr. Stenner so slowly? They were partners in crime. Mr. Stenner was loaning Mr. Cowperwood vast sums of the city's money at 2%, when call rates for money in 3rd Street were sometimes as high as 16 and 17%. Don't you suppose that Mr. Cowperwood, sitting there, knew how to use this very cheaply come-by money to the very best advantage? Does he look to you as though he didn't? You have seen him on the witness stand. You have heard him testify. Very suave, very straightforward-seeming, very innocent, doing everything as a favor to Mr. Stenner and his friends, of course, and yet making $1 million in a little over 6 years, and allowing Mr. Stenner to make $160,000 or less, for Mr. Stenner had some little money at the time this partnership was entered into, a few $1,000s. Shannon now came to the vital transaction of October 9th. When Cowperwood called on Stenner and secured the check for $60,000 from Albert Stiers. His scorn for this, as he appeared to think, subtle and criminal transaction was unbounded. It was plain larceny, stealing, and Cowperwood knew it when he asked Stiers for the check. "Think of it," Shannon exclaimed, turning and looking squarely at Cowperwood, who faced him quite calmly, undisturbed, and unashamed. "Think of it. Think of the colossal nerve of the man, the Machiavellian subtlety of his brain. He knew he was going to fail. He knew, after 2 days of financial work, after 2 days of struggle to offset the providential disaster which upset his nefarious schemes, that he had exhausted every possible resource save one, the city treasury, and that unless he could compel aid there, he was going to fail. He already owed the city treasury $500,000. He had already used the city treasurer as a cat's paw so much, and involved him so deeply, that the latter, because of the staggering size of the debt, was becoming frightened. Did that deter Mr. Cowperwood? Not at all. He shook his finger ominously in Cowperwood's face, and the latter turned irritably away. "He is showing off for the benefit of his future," he whispered to Steger. "I wish you could tell the jury that." "I wish I could," replied Steger, smiling scornfully, "but my hour is over." "Why," continued Mr. Shannon, turning once more to the jury, "think of the colossal wolfish nerve that would permit a man to say to Albert Stiers that he had just purchased $60,000 worth of additional city loan, and that he would then and there take a check for it. Had he actually purchased this city loan as he said he had? Who can tell? Could any human being wind through all the mazes of the complicated bookkeeping system which he ran and actually tell? The best answer to that is that if he did purchase the certificates he intended, that it should make no difference to the city, for he made no effort to put the certificates in the sinking fund where they belonged. His counsel says, and he says, that he didn't have to until the 1st of the month, although the law says that he must do it at once, and he knew well enough that legally he was bound to do it. His counsel says, and he says, that he didn't know he was going to fail. Hence there was no need of worrying about it. I wonder if any of you gentlemen really believe that. Had he ever asked for a check like that so quick before in his life? In all the history of these nefarious transactions, was there another incident like that? You know there wasn't. He had never before, on any occasion, asked personally for a check for anything in this office, and yet on this occasion he did it. Why? Why should he ask for it this time? A few hours more, according to his own statement, wouldn't have made any difference one way or the other, would it? He could have sent a boy for it, as usual. That was the way it had always been done before. Why anything different now? I'll tell you why. Shannon suddenly shouted, varying his voice tremendously.
I'll tell you why. He knew that he was a ruined man. He knew that his last semi-legitimate avenue of escape, the favor of George W. Stenner, had been closed to him. He knew that, honestly, by open agreement, he could not extract another single dollar from the treasury of the city of Philadelphia. He knew that if he left the office without his check and sent a boy for it, the aroused city treasurer would have time to inform his clerks, and that then no further money could be obtained. That's why, gentlemen, if you really want to know.
Now, gentlemen of the jury, I am about done with my arraignment of this fine, honorable, virtuous citizen, whom the counsel for the defense, Mr. Steger, tells you cannot possibly convict without doing a great injustice. All I have to say is that you look to me like sane, intelligent men, just the sort of men that I meet everywhere in the ordinary walks of life, doing an honorable American business in an honorable American way. Now, gentlemen of the jury, he was very soft-spoken now. All I have to say is that if, after all you have heard and seen here today, you still think that Mr. Frank A. Cowperwood is an honest, honorable man, that he didn't steal, willfully and knowingly, $60,000 from the Philadelphia City Treasury, that he had actually bought the certificates he said he had, and had intended to put them in the sinking fund, as he said he did, then don't you dare to do anything except turn him loose, and that speedily, so that he can go back today into 3rd Street and start to straighten out his much-entangled financial affairs. It is the only thing for honest, conscientious men to do, to turn him instantly loose into the heart of this community, so that some of the rank injustice that my opponent, Mr. Steger, alleges has been done him will be a little made up to him. You owe him, if that is the way you feel, a prompt acknowledgment of his innocence. Don't worry about George W. Stenner. His guilt is established by his own confession. He admits he is guilty. He will be sentenced without trial later on. But this man, he says he is an honest, honorable man. He says he didn't think he was going to fail. He says he used all that threatening, compelling, terrifying language, not because he was in danger of failing, but because he didn't want to bother of looking further for aid. What do you think? Do you really think that he had purchased $60,000 more of certificates for the sinking fund, and that he was entitled to the money? If so, why didn't he put them in the sinking fund? They're not there now, and the $60,000 is gone. Who got it? The Girard National Bank, where he was overdrawn to the extent of $100,000. Did it get it and $40,000 more in other checks and certificates? Certainly. Why? Do you suppose the Girard National Bank might be in any way grateful for this last little favor before he closed his doors? Do you think that President Davison, whom you saw here testifying so kindly in this case, feels at all friendly, and that may possibly, I don't say that it does, explain his very kind interpretation of Mr. Cowperwood's condition? It might be. You can think as well along that line as I can. Anyhow, gentlemen, President Davison says Mr. Cowperwood is an honorable, honest man, and so does his counsel, Mr. Steger. You have heard the testimony. Now you think it over. If you want to turn him loose, turn him loose. He waved his hand wearily. You're the judges. I wouldn't, but then I am merely a hard-working lawyer. One person, one opinion. You may think differently. That's your business. He waved his hand suggestively, almost contemptuously. However, I'm through, and I thank you for your courtesy. Gentlemen, the decision rests with you. He turned away grandly, and the jury stirred. So did the idle spectators in the court. Judge Peterson sighed a sigh of relief. It was now quite dark, and the flaring gas forms in the court were all brightly lighted. Outside, one could see that it was snowing. The judge stirred among his papers wearily, and turning to the jurors solemnly, began his customary explanation of the law, after which they filed out to the jury room. Cowperwood turned to his father, who now came over across the fast-emptying court, and said, "Well, we'll know now in a little while." "Yes," replied Cowperwood Sr. a little wearily. "I hope it comes out right. I saw Butler back there a little while ago." "Did you?" queried Cowperwood, to whom this had a peculiar interest. "Yes," replied his father. "He's just gone." So, Cowperwood thought, Butler was curious enough as to his fate to want to come here and watch him tried. Shannon was his tool. Judge Peterson was his emissary, in a way. He, Cowperwood, might defeat him in the matter of his daughter, but it was not so easy to defeat him here, unless the jury should happen to take a sympathetic attitude. They might convict him, and then Butler's Judge Peterson would have the privilege of sentencing him, giving him the maximum sentence. That would not be so nice. 5 years. He cooled a little as he thought of it, but there was no use worrying about what had not yet happened. Steger came forward and told him that his bail was now ended,
had been the moment the jury left the room, and that he was now, at this moment, actually in the care of the sheriff, of whom he knew, Sheriff Adlai Jaspers. Unless he were acquitted by the jury, Steger added, he would have to remain in the sheriff's care until an application for a certificate of reasonable doubt could be made and acted upon.
"It would take all of 5 days, Frank," Steger said, "but Jaspers isn't a bad sort. He'd be reasonable. Of course, if we're lucky, you won't have to visit him. You will have to go with this bailiff now, though. Then if things come out right, we'll go home. Say, I'd like to win this case," he said. "I'd like to give them the laugh and see you do it. I consider you've been pretty badly treated, and I think I made that perfectly clear. I can reverse this verdict on a dozen grounds if they happen to decide against you." He and Cowperwood and the latter's father now stalked off with the sheriff's subordinate, a small man by the name of Eddie Zanders, who had approached to take charge. They entered a small room called the Pen at the back of the court, where all those on trial whose liberty had been forfeited by the jury's leaving the room had to wait pending its return. It was a dreary, high-ceiled, four-square place, with a window looking out into Chestnut Street, and a second door leading off into somewhere. One had no idea where. It was dingy, with a worn wooden floor, some heavy plain wooden benches lining the four sides, no pictures or ornaments of any kind. A single two-arm gas pipe descended from the center of the ceiling. It was permeated by a peculiarly stale and pungent odor, obviously redolent of all the flotsam and jetsam of life, criminal and innocent, that had stood or sat in here from time to time, waiting patiently to learn what a deliberating fate held in store. Cowperwood was, of course, disgusted, but he was too self-reliant and capable to show it. All his life he had been immaculate, almost fastidious in his care of himself. Here he was coming, perforce, in contact with a form of life which jarred upon him greatly. Steger, who was beside him, made some comforting, explanatory, apologetic remarks. "Not as nice as it might be," he said, "but you won't mind waiting a little while. The jury won't be long, I fancy." "That may not help me," he replied, walking to the window. Afterward he added, "What must be, must be." His father winced. Suppose Frank was on the verge of a long prison term, which meant an atmosphere like this. Heavens! For a moment he trembled. Then, for the first time in years, he made a silent prayer. Chapter 44. Meanwhile, the great argument had been begun in the jury room, and all the points that had been meditatively speculated upon in the jury box were now being openly discussed. It is amazingly interesting to see how a jury will waver and speculate in a case like this, how curious and uncertain is the process by which it makes up its so-called mind. So-called truth is a nebulous thing at best. Facts are capable of such curious inversion and interpretation, honest and otherwise. The jury had a strongly complicated problem before it, and it went over it and over it. Juries reach not so much definite conclusions as verdicts, in a curious fashion and for curious reasons. Very often a jury will have concluded little so far as its individual members are concerned, and yet it will have reached a verdict. The matter of time, as all lawyers know, plays a part in this. Juries, speaking of the members collectively and frequently individually, object to the amount of time it takes to decide a case. They do not enjoy sitting and deliberating over a problem unless it is tremendously fascinating. The ramifications or the mystery of a syllogism can become a weariness and a bore. The jury room itself may and frequently does become a dull agony. On the other hand, no jury contemplates a disagreement with any degree of satisfaction. There is something so inherently constructive in the human mind that to leave a problem unsolved is plain misery. It haunts the average individual like any other important task left unfinished. Men in a jury room, like those scientifically demonstrated atoms of a crystal which scientists and philosophers love to speculate upon, like finally to arrange themselves into an orderly and artistic whole, to present a compact intellectual front, to be whatever they have set out to be, properly and rightly, a compact, sensible jury. One sees this same instinct magnificently displayed in every other phase of nature, in the drifting of seawood to the Sargasso Sea, in the geometric interrelation of air bubbles on the surface of still water, in the marvelous unreasoned architecture of so many insects and atomic forms which make up the substance and the texture of this world. It would seem as though the physical substance of life, this apparition of form which the eye detects and calls real, were shot through with some vast subtlety that loves order, that is order. The atoms of our so-called being, in spite of our so-called reason, the dreams of a mood, know where to go and what to do. They represent an order, a wisdom, a willing that is not of us. They build orderly in spite of us. So the subconscious spirit of a jury. At the same time, one does not forget the strange hypnotic effect of one personality on another, the varying effects of varying types on each other, until a solution, to use the word in its purely chemical sense, is reached. In a jury room, the thought or determination of one or two or three men, if it be definite enough, is likely to pervade the whole room and conquer the reason or the opposition of the majority. One man standing out for the definite thought that it is in him is apt to become either the triumphant leader of a pliant mass or the brutally battered target of a flaming, concentrated intellectual fire. Men despise dull opposition that is without reason. In a jury room, of all places, a man is expected to give a reason for the faith that is in him, if one is demanded. It will not do to say, "I cannot agree." Jurors have been known to fight. Bitter antagonisms lasting for years have been generated in these close quarters. Recalcitrant jurors have been hounded commercially in their local spheres for their unreasoned oppositions or conclusions. After reaching the conclusion that Cowperwood unquestionably deserved some punishment, there was wrangling as to whether the verdict should be guilty on all 4 counts, as charged in the indictment. Since they did not understand how to differentiate between the various charges very well, they decided it should be on all 4, and a recommendation to mercy added. Afterward, this last was eliminated, however. Either he was guilty or he was not. The judge could see as well as they could all the extenuating circumstances, perhaps better. Why tie his hands? As a rule, no attention was paid to such recommendations anyhow, and it only made the jury look wobbly. So, finally, at 10 minutes after 12 that night, they were ready to return a verdict. And Judge Peterson, who because of his interest in the case and the fact that he lived not so far away, had decided to wait up this long, was recalled. Steger and Cowperwood were sent for. The courtroom was fully lighted. The bailiff, the clerk, and the stenographer were there. The jury filed in, and Cowperwood, with Steger at his right, took his position at the gate which gave into the railed space where prisoners always stand to hear the verdict and listen to any commentary of the judge. He was accompanied by his father, who was very nervous. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he were walking in his sleep. Was this the real Frank Cowperwood of 2 months before, so wealthy, so progressive, so sure? Was this only December 5th or 6th now? It was after midnight. Why was it the jury had deliberated so long? What did it mean? Here they were now, standing and gazing solemnly before them, and here now was Judge Peterson, mounting the steps of his rostrum, his frizzled hair standing out in a strange, attractive way, his familiar bailiff rapping for order. He did not look at Cowperwood, it would not be courteous, but at the jury, who gazed at him in return. At the words of the clerk, "Gentlemen of the jury, have you agreed upon a verdict?" the foreman spoke up. "We have." "Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?" "We find the defendant guilty as charged in the indictment."
How had they come to do this? Because he had taken a check for $60,000 which did not belong to him? But in reality it did. Good Lord, what was $60,000 in the sum total of all the money that had passed back and forth between him and George W. Stenner? Nothing, nothing, a mere bagatelle in its way. And yet here it had risen up, this miserable, insignificant check, and become a mountain of opposition, a stone wall, a prison wall barring his further progress. It was astonishing. He looked around him at the courtroom. How large and bare and cold it was. Still, he was Frank A. Cowperwood. Why should he let such queer thoughts disturb him? His fight for freedom and privilege and restitution was not over yet. Good heavens, it had only begun. In 5 days he would be out again on bail. Steger would take an appeal.
He would be out, and he would have 2 long months in which to make an additional fight.
He was not down yet. He would win his liberty. This jury was all wrong. A higher court would say so. It would reverse their verdict, and he knew it. He turned to Steger, where the latter was having the clerk poll the jury, in the hope that some one juror had been over-persuaded, made to vote against his will. "Is that your verdict?" he heard the clerk ask of Philip Moultrie, juror number 1. "It is," replied that worthy, solemnly. "Is that your verdict?" The clerk was pointing to Simon Glassberg. "Yes, sir." "Is that your verdict?" He pointed to Fletcher Norton. "Yes." So it went through the whole jury. All the men answered firmly and clearly, though Steger thought it might barely be possible that one would have changed his mind. The judge thanked them, and told them that in view of their long services this night, they were dismissed for the term. The only thing remaining to be done now was for Steger to persuade Judge Peterson to grant a stay of sentence, pending the hearing of a motion by the state Supreme Court for a new trial. The judge looked at Cowperwood very curiously as Steger made this request in proper form, and owing to the importance of the case and the feeling he had that the Supreme Court might very readily grant a certificate of reasonable doubt in this case, he agreed. There was nothing left, therefore, but for Cowperwood to return at this late hour with the deputy sheriff to the county jail, where he must now remain for 5 days at least, possibly longer. The jail in question, which was known locally as Moyamensing Prison, was located at 10th and Reed Streets, and, from an architectural and artistic point of view, was not actually displeasing to the eye. It consisted of a central portion, prison, residence for the sheriff, or what you will, 3 stories high, with a battlemented cornice and a round battlemented tower about 1/3 as high as the central portion itself, and 2 wings, each 2 stories high, with battlemented turrets at either end, giving it a highly castellated and consequently, from the American point of view, a very prison-like appearance. The facade of the prison, which was not more than 35 feet high for the central portion, nor more than 25 feet for the wings, was set back at least 100 feet from the street, and was continued at either end, from the wings to the end of the street block, by a stone wall all of 20 feet high. The structure was not severely prison-like, for the central portion was pierced by rather large, unbarred apertures, hung on the 2 upper stories, with curtains, and giving the whole front a rather pleasant and residential air. The wing to the right, as one stood looking in from the street, was the section known as the county jail proper, and was devoted to the care of prisoners serving short-term sentences on some judicial order. The wing to the left was devoted exclusively to the care and control of untried prisoners. The whole building was built of a smooth, light-colored stone, which on a snowy night like this, with the few lamps that were used in it glowing feebly in the dark, presented an eerie, fantastic, almost supernatural appearance. It was a rough and blowy night when Cowperwood started for this institution under duress. The wind was driving the snow before it in curious, interesting whirls. Eddie Zanders, the sheriff's deputy on guard at the Court of Quarter Sessions, accompanied him and his father and Steger. Zanders was a little man, dark, with a short, stubby mustache, and a shrewd, though not highly intelligent eye. He was anxious first to uphold his dignity as a deputy sheriff, which was a very important position in his estimation, and next to turn an honest penny, if he could. He knew little save the details of his small world, which consisted of accompanying prisoners to and from the courts and the jails, and seeing that they did not get away. He was not unfriendly to a particular type of prisoner, the well-to-do or moderately prosperous, for he had long since learned that it paid to be so. Tonight he offered a few sociable suggestions, viz., that it was rather rough, that the jail was not so far but that they could walk, and that Sheriff Jaspers would, in all likelihood, be around or could be aroused. Cowperwood scarcely heard. He was thinking of his mother and his wife, and of Eileen. When the jail was reached, he was led to the central portion, as it was here that the sheriff, Adlai Jaspers, had his private office. Jaspers had recently been elected to office, and was inclined to conform to all outward appearances, in so far as the proper conduct of his office was concerned, without in reality inwardly conforming. Thus it was generally known among the politicians that one way he had of fattening his rather lean salary was to rent private rooms and grant special privileges to prisoners who had the money to pay for the same. Other sheriffs had done it before him. In fact, when Jaspers was inducted into office, several prisoners were already enjoying these privileges, and it was not a part of his scheme of things to disturb them. The rooms that he let to the right parties, as he invariably put it, were in the central portion of the jail, where were his own private living quarters. They were unbarred, and not at all cell-like. There was no particular danger of escape, for a guard stood always at his private door instructed to keep an eye on the general movements of all the inmates. A prisoner so accommodated was, in many respects, quite a free person. His meals were served to him in his room, if he wished. He could read or play cards, or receive guests, and if he had any favorite musical instrument, that was not denied him. There was just one rule that had to be complied with. If he were a public character, and any newspaper men called, he had to be brought downstairs into the private interviewing room, in order that they might not know that he was not confined in a cell like any other prisoner. Nearly all of these facts had been brought to Cowperwood's attention beforehand by Steger, but for all that, when he crossed the threshold of the jail, a peculiar sensation of strangeness and defeat came over him. He and his party were conducted to a little office to the left of the entrance, where were only a desk and a chair, dimly lighted by a low-burning gas jet. Sheriff Jaspers, rotund and ruddy, met them, greeting them in quite a friendly way. Sanders was dismissed, and went briskly about his affairs.
"A bad night, isn't it?"
observed Jaspers, turning up the gas and preparing to go through the routine of registering his prisoner. Steger came over and held a short, private conversation with him in his corner, over his desk, which resulted presently in the sheriff's face lighting up.
"Oh, certainly, certainly. That's all right, Mr. Steger, to be sure. Why, certainly."
Cowperwood, eyeing the fat sheriff from his position, understood what it was all about. He had regained completely his critical attitude, his cool intellectual poise. So this was the jail, and this was the fat mediocrity of a sheriff who was to take care of him. Very good. He would make the best of it. He wondered whether he was to be searched. Prisoners usually were, but he soon discovered that he was not to be.
"That's all right, Mr. Cowperwood," said Jaspers, getting up. "I guess I can make you comfortable after a fashion. We're not running a hotel here, as you know."
He chuckled to himself.
"But I guess I can make you comfortable. John,"
he called to a sleepy factotum, who appeared from another room rubbing his eyes,
"is the key to number 6 down here?"
"Yes, sir."
"Well, let me have it."
John disappeared and returned, while Steger explained to Cowperwood that anything he wanted in the way of clothing, etc., could be brought in. Steger himself would stop round next morning and confer with him, as would any of the members of Cowperwood's family whom he wished to see. Cowperwood immediately explained to his father his desire for as little of this as possible. Joseph or Edward might come in the morning and bring a grip full of underwear, etc., but as for the others, let them wait until he got out, or had to remain permanently. He did think of writing Eileen, cautioning her to do nothing, but the sheriff now beckoned, and he quietly followed. Accompanied by his father and Steger, he ascended to his new room. It was a simple, white-walled chamber, 15 by 20 feet in size, rather high-ceiled, supplied with a high-backed yellow wooden bed, a yellow bureau, a small imitation cherry table, 3 very ordinary cane-seated chairs with carved hickory rod backs, cherry-stained also, and a washstand of yellow-stained wood to match the bed, containing a wash-basin, a pitcher, a soap dish, uncovered, and a small, cheap, pink-flowered tooth and shaving-brush mug, which did not match the other ware, and which probably cost 10 cents. The value of this room to Sheriff Jaspers was what he could get for it in cases like this, $25 to $35 a week. Cowperwood would pay $35. Cowperwood walked briskly to the window, which gave out on the lawn in front, now embedded in snow, and said he thought this was all right. Both his father and Steger were willing and anxious to confer with him for hours, if he wished, but there was nothing to say. He did not wish to talk. "Let Ed bring in some fresh linen in the morning, and a couple of suits of clothes, and I will be all right. George can get my things together." He was referring to a family servant who acted as valet and in other capacities. "Tell Lillian not to worry. I'm all right. I'd rather she would not come here so long as I'm going to be out in 5 days, and if I'm not, it will be time enough then. Kiss the kids for me." And he smiled good-naturedly. After his unfulfilled predictions in regard to the result of this preliminary trial, Steger was almost afraid to suggest confidently what the State Supreme Court would or would not do, but he had to say something. "I don't think you need worry about what the outcome of my appeal will be, Frank. I'll get a certificate of reasonable doubt, and that's as good as a stay of 2 months, perhaps longer. I don't suppose the bail will be more than $30,000 at the outside. You'll be out again in 5 or 6 days, whatever happens." Cowperwood said that he hoped so, and suggested that they drop matters for the night. After a few fruitless parleys, his father and Steger finally said good night, leaving him to his own private reflections. He was tired, however, and throwing off his clothes, tucked himself into his mediocre bed, and was soon fast asleep. Chapter 45. Say what one will about prison life in general, modify it ever so much by special chambers, obsequious turnkeys, a general tendency to make one as comfortable as possible, a jail is a jail, and there is no getting away from that. Cowperwood, in a room which was not in any way inferior to that of the ordinary boarding-house, was nevertheless conscious of the character of that section of this real prison, which was not yet his portion. He knew that there were cells there, probably greasy and smelly and vermin-infested, and that they were enclosed by heavy iron bars, which would have as readily clanked on him as on those who were now therein incarcerated, if he had not had the price to pay for something better. So much for the alleged equality of man, he thought. which gave to one man, even within the grim confines of the machinery of justice, such personal liberty as he himself was now enjoying, and to another, because he chanced to lack wit, or presence, or friends, or wealth, denied the more comfortable things which money would buy. The morning after the trial, on waking, he stirred curiously, and then it suddenly came to him that he was no longer in the free and comfortable atmosphere of his own bedroom, but in a jail cell, or rather its very comfortable substitute, a sheriff's rented bedroom. He got up and looked out the window. The ground outside and Passayunk Avenue were white with snow. Some wagons were silently lumbering by. A few Philadelphians were visible here and there, going to and fro on morning errands. He began to think at once what he must do, how he must act to carry on his business, to rehabilitate himself. And as he did so he dressed and pulled the bell cord, which had been indicated to him, and which would bring him an attendant who would build him a fire, and later bring him something to eat. A shabby prison attendant in a blue uniform, conscious of Cowperwood's superiority because of the room he occupied, laid wood and coal in the grate and started a fire, and later brought him his breakfast, which was anything but prison fare, though poor enough at that. After that he was compelled to wait in patience several hours, in spite of the sheriff's assumption of solicitous interest, before his brother Edward was admitted with his clothes. An attendant, for a consideration, brought him the morning papers, and these, except for the financial news, he read indifferently. Late in the afternoon Steger arrived, saying he had been busy having certain proceedings postponed, but that he had arranged with the sheriff for Cowperwood to be permitted to see such of those as had important business with him. By this time Cowperwood had written Eileen under no circumstances to try to see him, as he would be out by the 10th, and that either that day or shortly after they would meet. As he knew, she wanted greatly to see him, but he had reason to believe she was under surveillance by detectives employed by her father. This was not true, but it was preying on her fancy, and combined with some derogatory remarks dropped by Owen and Callum at the dinner-table recently, had proved almost too much for her fiery disposition. But because of Cowperwood's letter reaching her at the Calligans, she made no move until she read on the morning of the 10th that Cowperwood's plea for a certificate of reasonable doubt had been granted, and that he would once more, for the time being at least, be a free man. This gave her courage to do what she had long wanted to do, and that was to teach her father that she could get along without him, and that he could not make her do anything she did not want to do. She still had the $200 Cowperwood had given her, and some additional cash of her own, perhaps $350 in all. This, she thought, would be sufficient to see her to the end of her adventure, or at least until she could make some other arrangement for her personal well-being. From what she knew of the feeling of her family for her, she felt that the agony would all be on their side, not hers. Perhaps when her father saw how determined she was, he would decide to let her alone and make peace with her. She was determined to try it, anyhow, and immediately sent word to Cowperwood that she was going to the Calligans and would welcome him to freedom. In a way, Cowperwood was rather gratified by Eileen's message, for he felt that his present plight, bitter as it was largely due to Butler's opposition, and he felt no compunction in striking him through his daughter. His former feeling as to the wisdom of not enraging Butler had proved rather futile, he thought, and since the old man could not be placated, it might be just as well to have Eileen demonstrate to him that she was not without resources of her own, and could live without him. She might force him to change his attitude toward her, and possibly even to modify some of his political machinations against him, Cowperwood. Any port in a storm, and besides, he had now really nothing to lose. And instinct told him that her move was likely to prove more favorable than otherwise, so he did nothing to prevent it. She took her jewels, some underwear, a couple of dresses which she thought would be serviceable, and a few other things, and packed them in the most capacious portmanteau she had. Shoes and stockings came into consideration, and, despite her efforts, she found that she could not get in all that she wished. Her nicest hat, which she was determined to take, had to be carried outside. She made a separate bundle of it, which was not pleasant to contemplate. Still, she decided to take it. She rummaged in a little drawer where she kept her money and jewels, and found the $350 and put it in her purse. It wasn't much, as Eileen could herself see, but Cowperwood would help her. If he did not arrange to take care of her, and her father would not relent, she would have to get something to do. Little she knew of the steely face the world presents to those who have not been practically trained and are not economically efficient. She did not understand the bitter reaches of life at all. She waited, humming for effect, until she heard her father go downstairs to dinner on this 10th day of December, then leaned over the upper balustrade to make sure that Owen, Callum, Nora, and her mother were at the table, and that Katy, the housemaid, was not anywhere in sight. Then she slipped into her father's den, and taking a note from inside her dress, laid it on his desk and went out. It was addressed to Father, and read, "Dear Father, I just cannot do what you want me to. I have made up my mind that I love Mr. Cowperwood too much, so I am going away. Don't look for me with him. You won't find me where you think. I am not going to him. I will not be there. I am going to try to get along by myself for a while, until he wants me and can marry me. I'm terribly sorry, but I just can't do what you want. I can't ever forgive you for the way you acted to me. Tell Mama and Nora and the boys goodbye for me. Eileen." To ensure its discovery, she picked up Butler's heavy-rimmed spectacles, which he employed always when reading, and laid them on it. For a moment she felt very strange, somewhat like a thief, a new sensation for her. She even felt a momentary sense of ingratitude coupled with pain. Perhaps she was doing wrong. Her father had been very good to her. Her mother would feel so very bad. Nora would be sorry, and Callum and Owen. Still, they did not understand her any more. She was resentful of her father's attitude. He might have seen what the point was, but no, he was too old, too hidebound in religion and conventional ideas. He never would. He might never let her come back. Very well, she would get along somehow. She would show him. She might get a place as a school teacher and live with the Calligans a long while, if necessary, or teach music. She stole downstairs and out into the vestibule, opening the outer door and looking out into the street. The lamps were already flaring in the dark, and a cold wind was blowing. Her portmanteau was heavy, but she was quite strong. She walked briskly to the corner, which was some 50 feet away, and turned south, walking rather nervously and irritably, for this was a new experience for her, and it all seemed so undignified, so unlike anything she was accustomed to doing. She put her bag down on the street corner, finally, to rest. A boy whistling in the distance attracted her attention, and as he drew near, she called to him. "Boy! Oh, boy!" He came over, looking at her curiously. "Do you want to earn some money?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied politely, adjusting a frowsy cap over one ear. "Carry this bag for me," said Eileen, and he picked it up and marched off. In due time she arrived at the Calligans, and amid much excitement was installed in the bosom of her new home. She took her situation with much nonchalance, once she was properly placed, distributing her toilet articles and those of personal wear with quiet care. The fact that she was no longer to have the services of Kathleen, the maid who had served her and her mother and Nora jointly, was odd, though not trying. She scarcely felt that she had parted from these luxuries permanently, and so made herself comfortable. Mamie Callaghan and her mother were adoring slavies, so she was not entirely out of the atmosphere which she craved and to which she was accustomed. Chapter 46. Meanwhile, in the Butler home, the family was assembling for dinner. Mrs. Butler was sitting in rotund complacency at the foot of the table, her gray hair combed straight back from her round, shiny forehead. She had on a dark gray silk dress, trimmed with gray and white striped ribbon. It suited her florid temperament admirably. Eileen had dictated her mother's choice, and had seen that it had been properly made. Nora was refreshingly youthful in a pale green dress with red velvet cuffs and collar.
She looked young, slender, gay.
Her eyes, complexion, and hair were fresh and healthy. She was trifling with a string of coral beads, which her mother had just given her. "Oh, look, Callum," she said to her brother opposite her, who was drumming idly on the table with his knife and fork. "Aren't they lovely? Mama gave them to me." "Mama does more for you than I would. You know what you'd get from me, don't you?" "What?" He looked at her teasingly. For answer, Nora made a face at him. Just then Owen came in and took his place at the table. Mrs. Butler saw Nora's grimace. "Well, that'll win no love from your brother, you can depend on that," she commented. "Lord, what a day," observed Owen wearily, unfolding his napkin. "I've had my fill of work for once." "What's the trouble?" queried his mother feelingly. "No real trouble, Mother," he replied. "Just everything. Ducks and drakes, that's all." "Well, you must eat a good hearty meal now, and that'll refresh ye," observed his mother, genially and feelingly. "Thompson," she was referring to the family grocer, "brought us the last of his beans. You must have some of those." "Sure, beans'll fix it, whatever it is, Owen," joked Callum. "Mother's got the answer." "They're fine, I'll have you know," replied Mrs. Butler, quite unconscious of the joke. "No doubt of it, Mother," replied Callum. "Real brain food. And let's feed some to Nora." "You better eat some yourself, smarty. My, but you're gay.
I suppose you're going out to see somebody, that's why. Right you are, Nora. Smart girl, you. 5 or 6, 10 to 15 minutes each. I'd call on you if you were nicer. You would if you got the chance, mocked Nora. I'd have you know I wouldn't let you. I'd feel very bad if I couldn't get somebody better than you. As good as, you mean, corrected Callum. Children, children, interpolated Mrs. Butler calmly, looking about for old John, the servant. You'll be losing your tempers in a minute. Hush now. Here comes your father. Where's Eileen? Butler walked heavily in and took his seat. John, the servant, appeared bearing a platter of beans, among other things, and Mrs. Butler asked him to send someone to call Eileen. "It's getting colder, I'm thinking," said Butler by way of conversation, and eyeing Eileen's empty chair. She would come soon now, his heavy problem. He had been very tactful these last 2 months, avoiding any reference to Cowperwood, in so far as he could help in her presence. "It's colder," remarked Owen, "much colder. We'll soon see real winter now." Old John began to offer the various dishes in order, but when all had been served, Eileen had not yet come. "See where Eileen is, John," observed Mrs. Butler interestedly. "The meal will be getting cold." Old John returned with the news that Eileen was not in her room. "Sure she must be somewhere," commented Mrs. Butler, only slightly perplexed. "She'll be coming, though, never mind, if she wants to. She knows it's meal-time." The conversation drifted from a new waterworks that was being planned to the new City Hall, then nearing completion, Cowperwood's financial and social troubles, and the state of the stock market generally, a new gold mine in Arizona, the departure of Mrs. Mollenhauer the following Tuesday for Europe, with appropriate comments by Nora and Callum, and a Christmas ball that was going to be given for charity. "Eileen'll be wanting to go to that," commented Mrs. Butler. "I'm going, you bet," put in Nora. "Who's going to take you?" asked Callum. "That's my affair, mister," she replied smartly. The meal was over, and Mrs. Butler strolled up to Eileen's room to see why she had not come down to dinner. Butler entered his den, wishing so much that he could take his wife into his confidence concerning all that was worrying him. On his desk, as he sat down and turned up the light, he saw the note. He recognized Eileen's handwriting at once. What could she mean by writing him? A sense of the untoward came to him, and he tore it open slowly, and putting on his glasses, contemplated it solemnly. So Eileen was gone. The old man stared at each word as if it had been written in fire. She said she had not gone with Cowperwood. It was possible, just the same, that he had run away from Philadelphia and taken her with him. This was the last straw. This ended it. Eileen lured away from home. To where? To what? Butler could scarcely believe, though, that Cowperwood had tempted her to do this. He had too much at stake. It would involve his own and Butler's families. The papers would be certain to get it quickly. He got up, crumpling the paper in his hand, and turned about at a noise. His wife was coming in. He pulled himself together and shoved the letter in his pocket. "Eileen's not in her room," she said curiously. "She didn't say anything to you about going out, did she?" "No," he replied truthfully, wondering how soon he would have to tell his wife. "That's odd," observed Mrs. Butler doubtfully. "She must have gone out for something. It's a wonder she wouldn't tell somebody." Butler gave no sign. He dared not. "She'll be back," he said, more in order to gain time than anything else. He was sorry to have to pretend. Mrs. Butler went out, and he closed the door. Then he took out the letter and read it again. The girl was crazy. She was doing an absolutely wild, inhuman, senseless thing. Where could she go except to Cowperwood? She was on the verge of a public scandal, and this would produce it. There was just one thing to do, as far as he could see. Cowperwood, if he were still in Philadelphia, would know. He would go to him, threaten, cajole, actually destroy him if necessary. Eileen must come back. She need not go to Europe, perhaps, but she must come back and behave herself at least until Cowperwood could legitimately marry her. That was all he could expect now. She would have to wait, and someday, perhaps, he could bring himself to accept her wretched proposition. Horrible thought. It would kill her mother, disgrace her sister. He got up, took down his hat, put on his overcoat, and started out. Arriving at the Cowperwood home, he was shown into the reception room. Cowperwood, at the time, was in his den looking over some private papers. When the name of Butler was announced, he immediately went downstairs. It was characteristic of the man that the announcement of Butler's presence created no stir in him whatsoever. So Butler had come. That meant, of course, that Eileen had gone. Now for a battle, not of words, but of weights of personalities. He felt himself to be intellectually, socially, and in every other way the more powerful man of the two.
that spiritual content of him which we call life hardened to the texture of steel. He recalled that although he had told his wife and his father that the politicians, of whom Butler was one, were trying to make a scapegoat of him, Butler, nevertheless, was not considered to be wholly alienated as a friend, and civility must prevail. He would like very much to placate him if he could, to talk out the hard facts of life in a quiet and friendly way, but this matter of Eileen had to be adjusted now once and for all, and with that thought in his mind he walked quickly into Butler's presence. The old man, when he learned that Cowperwood was in and would see him, determined to make his contact with the financier as short and effective as possible. He moved the least bit when he heard Cowperwood's step, as light and springy as ever. "Good evening, Mr. Butler," said Cowperwood cheerfully, when he saw him, extending his hand. "What can I do for you?" "You can take that away from in front of me, for one thing," said Butler, grimly referring to his hand. "I have no need of it. It's my daughter I've come to talk to ye about, and I want plain answers. Where is she?" "You mean Eileen?" said Cowperwood, looking at him with steady, curious, unrevealing eyes, and merely interpolating this to obtain a moment for reflection. "What can I tell you about her?" "You can tell me where she is, that I know, and you can make her come back to her home, where she belongs. It was bad fortune that ever brought you across my doorstep, but I'll not bandy words with you here. You'll tell me where my daughter is, and you'll leave her alone from now, or I'll—" The old man's fist closed like a vice, and his chest heaved with suppressed rage. "You'll not be driving me too far, man, if you're wise," he added after a time, recovering his equanimity in part. "I want no thruck with you. I want my daughter." "Listen, Mr. Butler," said Cowperwood quite calmly, relishing the situation for the sheer sense of superiority it gave him. "I want to be perfectly frank with you, if you will let me. I may know where your daughter is, and I may not. I may wish to tell you, and I may not. She may not wish me to, but unless you wish to talk with me in a civil way, there is no need of our going on any further. You are privileged to do what you like. Won't you come upstairs to my room? We can talk more comfortably there." Butler looked at his former protégé in utter astonishment. He had never before in all his experience come up against a more ruthless type. Suave, bland, forceful, unterrified. This man had certainly come to him as a sheep, and had turned out to be a ravening wolf. His incarceration had not put him in the least awe. "I'll not come up to your room," Butler said, "and you'll not get out of Philadelphia with her if that's what you're planning. I can see to that. You think you have the upper hand of me, I see, and you're anxious to make something of it. Well, you're not. It wasn't enough that you came to me as a beggar, craving the help of me, and that I took you in and helped you all I could. You had to steal my daughter from me in the bargain. If it wasn't for the girl's mother and her sister and her brothers, decenter men than ever you'll know how to be, I'd brain you where you stand, taking a young innocent girl and making an evil woman out of her, and ye a married man. It's a God's blessing for you that it's me, and not one of me sons, that's here talking to you, or you wouldn't be alive to say what you'd do." The old man was grim but impotent in his rage. "I'm sorry, Mr. Butler," replied Cowperwood quietly. "I'm willing to explain, but you won't let me. I'm not planning to run away with your daughter, nor to leave Philadelphia. You ought to know me well enough to know that I'm not contemplating anything of that kind. My interests are too large. You and I are practical men. We ought to be able to talk this matter over together and reach an understanding. I thought once of coming to you and explaining this, but I was quite sure you wouldn't listen to me. Now that you are here, I would like to talk to you. If you will come up to my room, I will be glad to. Otherwise not. Won't you come up?" Butler saw that Cowperwood had the advantage. He might as well go up. Otherwise it was plain he would get no information. "Very well," he said. Cowperwood led the way quite amicably, and having entered his private office, closed the door behind him. "We ought to be able to talk this matter over and reach an understanding," he said again, when they were in the room and he had closed the door. "I am not as bad as you think, though I know I appear very bad." Butler stared at him in contempt. "I love your daughter, and she loves me. I know you are asking yourself how I can do this while I am still married, but I assure you I can, and that I do. I am not happily married. I had expected, if this panic hadn't come along, to arrange with my wife for a divorce and marry Eileen. My intentions are perfectly good. The situation which you can complain of course, is the one you encountered a few weeks ago. It was indiscreet, but it was entirely human. Your daughter does not complain. She understands." At the mention of his daughter in this connection, Butler flushed with rage and shame, but he controlled himself. "And you think because he doesn't complain that it's all right, do you?" he asked sarcastically. "From my point of view, yes. From yours, no. You have one view of life, Mr. Butler, and I have another." "You're right there," put in Butler, "for once, anyhow. That doesn't prove that either of us is right or wrong. In my judgment, the present end justifies the means. The end I have in view is to marry Eileen. If I can possibly pull myself out of this financial scrape that I'm in, I will do so. Of course, I would like to have your consent for that. So would Eileen. But if we can't, we can't." Cowperwood was thinking that while this might not have a very soothing effect on the old contractor's point of view, nevertheless it must make some appeal to his sense of the possible or necessary. Eileen's present situation was quite unsatisfactory without marriage in view, and even if he, Cowperwood, was a convicted embezzler in the eyes of the public, that did not make him so. He might get free and restore himself, would, certainly, and Eileen ought to be glad to marry him if she could under the circumstances. He did not quite grasp the depth of Butler's religious and moral prejudices. "Lately," he went on, "you have been doing all you can, as I understand it, to pull me down on account of Eileen, I suppose. But that is simply delaying what I want to do." "You'd like me to help you do that, I suppose," suggested Butler with infinite disgust and patience. "I want to marry Eileen," Cowperwood repeated, for emphasis' sake. "She wants to marry me. Under the circumstances, however you may feel, you can have no real objection to my doing that, I am sure. Yet you go on fighting me, making it hard for me to do what you really know ought to be done." "You're a scoundrel," said Butler, seeing through his motives quite clearly. "You're a sharper, to my way of thinking, and it's no child of mine I want connected with you. I'm not saying, seeing that things are as they are, that if you were a free man it wouldn't be better that she should marry you. It's the one decent thing you could do, if you would, which I doubt. But that's neither here nor there now. What can you want with her hid away somewhere? You can't marry her. You can't get a divorce. You've got your hands full fighting your lawsuits and keeping yourself out of jail. She'll only be an added expense to you, and you'll be wanting all the money you have for other things, I'm thinking. Why should you want to be taking her away from a decent home and making something out of her that you'd be ashamed to marry if you could? The least you could do, if you're any kind of a man at all, and had any of that thing that you're pleased to call love, would be to leave her at home and keep her as respectable as possible. Mind you, I'm not thinking she isn't 10,000 times too good for you, whatever you've made of her. But if you had any sense of decency left, you wouldn't let her shame her family and break her old mother's heart, and that for no purpose except to make her worse than she is already. What good can you get out of it now? What good can you expect to come of it? By heavens, if you had any sense at all, I should think you could see that for yourself. You're only adding to your troubles, not taking away from them, and she'll not thank you for that later on." He stopped, rather astonished that he should have been drawn into an argument. His contempt for this man was so great that he could scarcely look at him, but his duty and his need was to get Eileen back. Cowperwood looked at him as one who gives serious attention to another. He seemed to be thinking deeply over what Butler had said. "To tell you the truth, Mr. Butler," he said, "I did not want Eileen to leave your home at all, and she will tell you so, if you ever talk to her about it. I did my best to persuade her not to, and when she insisted on going, the only thing I could do was to be sure she would be comfortable wherever she went. She was greatly outraged to think you should have put detectives on her trail. That, and the fact that you wanted to send her away somewhere against her will, was the principal reasons for her leaving. I assure you I did not want her to go. I think you forget sometimes, Mr. Butler, that Eileen is a grown woman, and that she has a will of her own. You think I control her to her great disadvantage. As a matter of fact, I am very much in love with her, and have been for 3 or 4 years. And if you know anything about love, you know that it doesn't always mean control. I'm not doing Eileen any injustice when I say that she has had as much influence on me as I have had on her. I love her, and that's the cause of all the trouble. You come and insist that I shall return your daughter to you. As a matter of fact, I don't know whether I can or not. I don't know that she would go if I wanted her to. She might turn on me and say that I didn't care for her any more. That is not true, and I would not want her to feel that way. She is greatly hurt, as I told you, by what you did to her, and the fact that you want her to leave Philadelphia. You can do as much to remedy that as I can. I could tell you where she is, but I do not know that I want to. Certainly not until I know what your attitude toward her and this whole proposition is to be." He paused and looked calmly at the old contractor, who eyed him grimly in return. "What proposition are you talking about?" asked Butler, interested by the peculiar developments of this argument. In spite of himself, he was getting a slightly different angle on the whole situation. The scene was shifting to a certain extent. Cowperwood appeared to be reasonably sincere in the matter. His promises might all be wrong, but perhaps he did love Eileen, and it was possible that he did intend to get a divorce from his wife sometime and marry her. Divorce, as Butler knew, was against the rules of the Catholic Church, which he so much revered. The laws of God and any sense of decency commanded that Cowperwood should not desert his wife and children and take up with another woman, not even Eileen, in order to save her. It was a criminal thing to plan, sociologically speaking, and showed what a villain Cowperwood inherently was. But, nevertheless, Cowperwood was not a Catholic. His views of life were not the same as his own, Butler's, and besides, and worst of all, no doubt due in part to Eileen's own temperament, he had compromised her situation very materially. She might not easily be restored to a sense of the normal and decent, and so the matter was worth taking into thought. Butler knew that ultimately he could not countenance any such thing, certainly not, and keep his faith with the Church, but he was human enough nonetheless to consider it. Besides, he wanted Eileen to come back, and Eileen, from now on, he knew, would have some say as to what her future should be. "Well, it's simple enough," replied Cowperwood. "I should like to have you withdraw your opposition to Eileen's remaining in Philadelphia, for one thing, and for another, I should like you to stop your attacks on me." Cowperwood smiled in an ingratiating way. He hoped really to placate Butler in part by his generous attitude throughout this procedure. "I can't make you do that, of course, unless you want to. I merely bring it up, Mr. Butler, because I am sure that if it hadn't been for Eileen, you would not have taken the course you have taken toward me. I understood you received an anonymous letter, and that afternoon you called your loan with me. Since then I have heard from one source and another that you were strongly against me, and I merely wish to say that I wish you wouldn't be. I am not guilty of embezzling any $60,000, and you know it. My intentions were of the best. I did not think I was going to fail at the time I used those certificates, and if it hadn't been for several other loans that were called, I would have gone on to the end of the month and put them back in time, as I always had. I have always valued your friendship very highly, and I am very sorry to lose it. Now I have said all I am going to say." Butler looked at Cowperwood with shrewd, calculating eyes. The man had some merit, but much unconscionable evil in him. Butler knew very well how he had taken the check, and a good many other things in connection with it. The manner in which he had played his cards tonight was on a par with the way he had run to him on the night of the fire. He was just shrewd and calculating and heartless. "I'll make you no promise," he said. "Tell me where my daughter is, and I'll think the matter over. You have no claim on me now, and I owe you no good turn, but I'll think it over anyhow." "That's quite all right," replied Cowperwood. "That's all I can expect. But what about Eileen? Do you expect her to leave Philadelphia?" "Not if she settles down and behaves herself, but there must be an end of this between you and her. She's disgracing her family and ruining her soul in the bargain, and that's what you're doing with yours. It'll be time enough to talk about anything else when you're a free man. More than that I'll not promise." Cowperwood, satisfied that this move on Eileen's part had done her a real service, if it had not aided him especially, was convinced that it would be a good move for her to return to her home at once. He could not tell how his appeal to the state Supreme Court would eventuate. His motion for a new trial, which was now to be made under the privilege of the certificate of reasonable doubt, might not be granted, in which case he would have to serve a term in the penitentiary. If he were compelled to go to the penitentiary, she would be safer, better off in the bosom of her family. His own hands were going to be exceedingly full for the next 2 months, until he knew how his appeal was coming out. And after that, well, after that he would fight on, whatever happened. During all the time that Cowperwood had been arguing his case in this fashion, he had been thinking how he could adjust this compromise so as to retain the affection of Eileen and not offend her sensibilities by urging her to return. He knew that she would not agree to give up seeing him, and he was not willing that she should. Unless he had a good and sufficient reason, he was going to be playing a wretched part by telling Butler where she was. He did not intend to do so until he saw exactly how to do it, the way that would make it most acceptable to Eileen. He knew that she would not long be happy where she was. Her flight was due in part to Butler's intense opposition to himself, and in part to his determination to make her leave Philadelphia and behave. But this last was now in part obviated. Butler, in spite of his words, was no longer a stern nemesis. He was a melting man, very anxious to find his daughter, very willing to forgive her. He was whipped, literally beaten, at his own game, and Cowperwood could see it in the old man's eyes. If he himself could talk to Eileen personally and explain just how things were, he felt sure he could make her see that it would be to their mutual advantage, for the present at least, to have the matter amicably settled. The thing to do was to make Butler wait somewhere, here possibly, while he went and talked to her. When she learned how things were, she would probably acquiesce. "The best thing that I can do under the circumstances," he said after a time, "would be to see Eileen in 2 or 3 days, and ask her what she wishes to do. I can explain the matter to her, and if she wants to go back, she can. I will promise to tell her anything that you say."
2 or 3 days!" exclaimed Butler irritably. 2 or 3 fiddlesticks! She must come home tonight. Her mother doesn't know she's left the place yet. Tonight is the time. I'll go and fetch her myself tonight.
"No, that won't do," said Cowperwood. "I shall have to go myself. If you wish to wait here, I will see what can be done, and let you know."
"Very well," grunted Butler, who was now walking up and down with his hands behind his back. "But for heaven's sake, be quick about it. There's no time to lose." He was thinking of Mrs. Butler. Cowperwood called the servant, ordered his runabout, and told George to see that his private office was not disturbed. Then, as Butler strolled to and fro in this, to him, objectionable room, Cowperwood drove rapidly away. Chapter 47. Although it was nearly 11 o'clock when he arrived at the Calligans, Eileen was not yet in bed. In her bedroom upstairs she was confiding to Mamie and Mrs. Callaghan some of her social experiences when the bell rang, and Mrs. Callaghan went down and opened the door to Cowperwood. "Miss Butler is here, I believe," he said. "Will you tell her that there is someone here from her father?" Although Eileen had instructed that her presence here was not to be divulged even to the members of her family, the force of Cowperwood's presence and the mention of Butler's name cost Mrs. Callaghan her presence of mind. "Wait a moment," she said. "I'll see." She stepped back, and Cowperwood promptly stepped in, taking off his hat with the air of one who was satisfied that Eileen was there. "Say to her that I only want to speak to her for a few moments," he called, as Mrs. Callaghan went upstairs, raising his voice in the hope that Eileen might hear. She did, and came down promptly. She was very much astonished to think that he should come so soon, and fancied, in her vanity, that there must be a great excitement in her home. She would have greatly grieved if there had not been. The Calligans would have been pleased to hear, but Cowperwood was cautious. As she came down the stairs, he put his finger to his lips in sign for silence and said, "This is Miss Butler, I believe." "Yes," replied Eileen with a secret smile. Her one desire was to kiss him. "What's the trouble, darling?" she asked softly. "You'll have to go back, dear, I'm afraid," whispered Cowperwood. "You'll have everything in a turmoil if you don't. Your mother doesn't know yet, it seems, and your father is over at my place now waiting for you. It may be a good deal of help to me if you do. Let me tell you." He went off into a complete description of his conversation with Butler and his own views in the matter. Eileen's expression changed from time to time as the various phases of the matter were put before her. But persuaded by the clearness with which he put the matter, and by his assurance that they could continue their relations as before uninterrupted, once this was settled, she decided to return. In a way, her father's surrender was a great triumph. She made her farewells to the Calligans, saying with a smile that they could not do without her at home, and that she would send for her belongings later, and returned with Cowperwood to his own door. There he asked her to wait in the runabout while he sent her father down. "Well," said Butler, turning on him when he opened the door and not seeing Eileen. "You'll find her outside in my runabout," observed Cowperwood. "You may use that if you choose. I will send my man for it." "No, thank you. We'll walk," said Butler. Cowperwood called his servant to take charge of the vehicle, and Butler stalked solemnly out. He had to admit to himself that the influence of Cowperwood over his daughter was deadly and probably permanent. The best he could do would be to keep her within the precincts of the home, where she might still, possibly, be brought to her senses. He held a very guarded conversation with her on his way home, for fear that she would take additional offense. Argument was out of the question. "You might have talked with me once more, Eileen," he said, "before you left. Your mother would be in a terrible state if she knew you were gone. She doesn't know yet. You'll have to say you stayed somewhere to dinner." "I was at the Calligans," replied Eileen. "That's easy enough. Mamma won't think anything about it." "It's a sore heart I have, Eileen. I hope you'll think over your ways and do better. I'll not say anything more now." Eileen returned to her room, decidedly triumphant in her mood for the moment, and things went on apparently in the Butler household as before. But those who imagine that this defeat permanently altered the attitude of Butler toward Cowperwood are mistaken. In the meanwhile, between the day of his temporary release and the hearing of his appeal, which was 2 months off, Cowperwood was going on doing his best to repair his shattered forces. He took up his work where he left off, but the possibility of reorganizing his business was distinctly modified since his conviction.
Because of his action in trying to protect his largest creditors at the time of his failure, he fancied that once he was free again, if ever he got free, his credit, other things being equal, would be good with those who could help him most. Say, Cook & Company, Clark & Company, Drexel & Company, and the Girard National Bank, providing his personal reputation had not been too badly injured by his sentence. Fortunately for his own hopefulness of mind, he failed fully to realize what a depressing effect a legal decision of his character, sound or otherwise, had on the minds of even his most enthusiastic supporters. His best friends in the financial world were by now convinced that he was a sinking ship. A student of finance once observed that nothing is so sensitive as money, and the financial mind partakes largely of the quality of the thing in which it deals. There was no use trying to do much for a man who might be going to prison for a term of years. Something might be done for him possibly in connection with the governor, providing he lost his case before the Supreme Court and was actually sentenced to prison. But that was 2 months off, or more, and they could not tell what the outcome of that would be. So Cowperwood's repeated appeals for assistance, extension of credit, or the acceptance of some plan he had for his general rehabilitation were met with the kindly evasions of those who were doubtful. They would think it over. They would see about it. Certain things were standing in the way, and so on and so forth through all the endless excuses of those who do not care to act. In these days he went about the money world in his customary jaunty way, greeting all those whom he had known there many years, and pretending, when asked, to be very hopeful, to be doing very well. But they did not believe him, and he really did not care whether they did or not. His business was to persuade or over-persuade anyone who would really be of assistance to him, and at this task he worked untiringly, ignoring all others. "Why, hello, Frank," his friends would call on seeing him. "How are you getting on?" "Fine, fine," he would reply cheerfully. "Never better." And he would explain in a general way how his affairs were being handled. He conveyed much of his own optimism to all those who knew him and were interested in his welfare, but of course there were many who were not. In these days also he and Steger were constantly to be met with in courts of law, for he was constantly being re-examined in some petition in bankruptcy. They were heartbreaking days, but he did not flinch. He wanted to stay in Philadelphia and fight the thing to a finish, putting himself where he had been before the fire, rehabilitating himself in the eyes of the public. He felt that he could do it, too, if he were not actually sent to prison for a long term, and even then, so naturally optimistic was his mood, when he got out again. But insofar as Philadelphia was concerned, distinctly he was dreaming vain dreams. One of the things militating against him was the continued opposition of Butler and the politicians. Somehow, no one could have said exactly why, the general political feeling was that the financier and the former city treasurer would lose their appeals and eventually be sentenced together. Stenner, in spite of his original intention to plead guilty and take his punishment without comment, had been persuaded by some of his political friends that it would be better for his future's sake to plead not guilty, and claim that his offense had been due to custom, rather than to admit his guilt outright, and so seem not to have had any justification whatsoever. This he did, but he was convicted nevertheless. For the sake of appearances, a trumped-up appeal was made, which was now before the state Supreme Court. Then, too, due to one whisper and another, and these originating with the girl who had written Butler and Cowperwood's wife, there was at this time a growing volume of gossip relating to alleged relations of Cowperwood with Butler's daughter, Eileen. There had been a house in 10th Street. It had been maintained by Cowperwood for her. No wonder Butler was so vindictive. This indeed explained much, and even in the practical, financial world, criticism was now rather against Cowperwood than his enemies. For was it not a fact that at the inception of his career he had been befriended by Butler? And what a way to reward that friendship! His oldest and firmest admirers wagged their heads, for they sensed clearly that this was another illustration of that innate "I satisfy myself" attitude which so regulated Cowperwood's conduct. He was a strong man, surely, and a brilliant one. Never had 3rd Street seen a more pyrotechnic and yet fascinating and financially aggressive, and at the same time conservative person. Yet might one not fairly tempt Nemesis by a too great daring and egotism? Like death, it loves a shining mark. He should not, perhaps, have seduced Butler's daughter. Unquestionably, he should not have so boldly taken that check, especially after his quarrel and break with Stenner. He was a little too aggressive. Was it not questionable whether, with such a record, he could be restored to his former place here? The bankers and businessmen who were closest to him were decidedly dubious. But insofar as Cowperwood and his own attitude toward life was concerned, at this time, the feeling he had, "I satisfy myself," when combined with his love of beauty and love and women, still made him ruthless and thoughtless. Even now, the beauty and delight of a girl like Eileen Butler were far more important to him than the goodwill of 50 million people, if he could evade the necessity of having their goodwill. Previous to the Chicago fire and the panic, his star had been so rapidly ascending that in the helter-skelter of great and favorable events he had scarcely taken thought of the social significance of the thing he was doing. Youth and the joy of life were in his blood. He felt so young, so vigorous, so like new grass looks and feels. The freshness of spring evenings was in him, and he did not care. After the crash, when one might have imagined he would have seen the wisdom of relinquishing Eileen for the time being anyhow, he did not care to. She represented the best of the wonderful days that had gone before. She was a link between him and the past, and a still-to-be triumphant future. The worst anxiety was that if he were sent to the penitentiary, or adjudged a bankrupt, or both, he would probably lose the privilege of a seat on 'Change, and that would close to him the most distinguished avenue of his prosperity here in Philadelphia for some time, if not forever. At present, because of his complications, his seat had been attached as an asset, and he could not act. Edward and Joseph, almost the only employees he could afford, were still acting for him in a small way, but the other members of 'Change naturally suspected his brothers as his agents, and any talk that they might raise of going into business for themselves merely indicated to other brokers and bankers that Cowperwood was contemplating some concealed move which would not necessarily be advantageous to his creditors, and against the law anyhow.
Yet he must remain on 'Change, whatever happened, potentially if not actively. And so, in his quick mental searchings, he hit upon the idea that in order to forfend against the event of his being put into prison, or thrown into bankruptcy, or both, he ought to form a subsidiary silent partnership with some man who was or would be well liked on 'Change, and whom he could use as a cat's paw and a dummy.
Finally he hit upon a man who he thought would do. He did not amount to much, had a small business, but he was honest, and he liked Cowperwood. His name was Wingate, Stephen Wingate, and he was eking out a not-too-robust existence in South 3rd Street as a broker. He was 45 years of age, of medium height, fairly thick-set, not at all unprepossessing, and rather intelligent and active, but not too forceful and pushing in spirit. He really needed a man like Cowperwood to make him into something, if ever he was to be made. He had a seat on 'Change, and was well thought of, respected but not so very prosperous. In times past he had asked small favors of Cowperwood, the use of small loans at a moderate rate of interest, tips, and so forth. And Cowperwood, because he liked him and felt a little sorry for him, had granted them. And now Wingate was slowly drifting down toward a none-too-successful old age, and was as tractable as such a man would naturally be. No one, for the time being, would suspect him of being a hireling of Cowperwood's, and the latter could depend on him to execute his orders to the letter. He sent for him and had a long conversation with him. He told him just what the situation was, what he thought he could do for him as a partner, how much of his business he would want for himself, and so on, and found him agreeable.
"I'll be glad to do anything you say, Mr. Cowperwood," he assured the latter. "I know whatever happens that you'll protect me, and there's nobody in the world I would rather work with or have greater respect for. This storm will all blow over, and you'll be all right. We can try it anyhow. If it don't work out, you can see what you want to do about it later." And so this relationship was tentatively entered into, and Cowperwood began to act in a small way through Wingate.